You might be.
And open it. Alrighty, well, welcome everyone. It is 1:00 p.m. Tuesday, February 11th, and we are going to begin this work session of the Lake County Board of County Commissioners. Thanks for showing up and making the drive all the way up here. I know that's not a fun drive, so we appreciate it.
No problem. I can do it with my eyes closed.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, I was actually up here Thursday last week for another thing. So yeah, twice in a week is it's not a bad way to spend your time for sure.
Yeah, the topography, you know it, but it's the other drivers.
Yeah.
So I'm Andy Lee, one of the newly elected county commissioners.
I'm Matt Bullock.
And I'm Elsa Tharp.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you all.
I'm Kyle Sandor. I am the CDPHE project manager for the California Gulf Superfund site.
Can you just spell out the acronym once before we get started?
It's the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment.
I knew that.
Yep, we've said that one a couple times this morning.
Sorry to interrupt you there.
Yeah, no problem.
Linda Keeper, I'm with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And I've been the project manager on the site for 16 years, so
Cool.
long time.
Wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, so I haven't been around as long, but I'm getting up there. I started working for the state in 2016, so almost 10 years. Yeah, I've been working on this site ever since I had started, so.
Well, I remember when, all the multitudes of different, EPA stories that we've had over the last, 26 years since I moved here, whether it was, the Superfund cleanup, you're getting free topsoil, the mine tunnels are gonna burst and flood town, all the fun stuff that we've had over the years, so it'd be interesting to, learn more about that.
Yeah, so for today's meeting, we did put together a presentation that kind of goes over a lot of that site history and kind of explains, what these meetings are kind of all about. We do meet quarterly to go over we call it the LCCHP, but it's the Lake County Community Health Program, and it was the selected remedy for operable Unit 9 of the site, and so we meet quarterly to discuss a number of topics. This meeting will be a little bit different because of the presentation, but normally what we go over is the blood testing efforts that the county health department does. We'll discuss those results, and through our program, we kind of have a path for addressing elevated blood levels that ultimately could lead to remediation of the property. And so that's primarily what these meetings are for, is to discuss those efforts, and then we'll also answer any questions that you guys have about what's happening with our site work and the site overall, and then we'll also give updates on if we haven't touched on any items that we specifically want to let you guys know about. We'll give an overall site update. So that's normally how the meetings go, but today will be a little different.
Before we all get started, Melanie, would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. Hi all, I'm Melanie Granberg. I am an environmental attorney, and I am with the law firm of Davis, Graham and Stubbs here in Denver. I just joined Davis Graham a little over a year ago. Prior to that, I had my own firm along with Tim Gablehouse, my partner there. You may have heard his name over the years. We've both done a lot of work for the county for over 15 years or so. I think we've represented the county as their environmental legal counsel. Chris Floyd calls on us whenever she has some questions. The commissioners have reached out directly over the years. County health, we're here. We do pretty much anything related to environmental matters, helping the county not only with a Superfund site, but with a landfill and other issues that come up, environmental aspects of land use applications, really anything relating to environmental, we're here to be a resource for the county in any way that's meaningful to you. You won't, hear me pestering you a whole lot, but just know that we're here as a resource for you. As things come up, that we think are relevant, we'll get those out to you, but otherwise we do attend these meetings with the LCCHP, with EPA and CDPHE as a representative, as legal counsel for the county. So that's a little bit about what we do, and I'm happy to have a separate meeting. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person today due to scheduling conflicts, but happy to have more detailed, conversations with the commissioners as you get on board, and we can do that in executive session or in a way that's privileged if we need to.
Great, thanks so much, Melanie. So, yeah,
Thank you.
anytime we have these quarterly meetings, this is pretty much the group that comes, and lots of knowledge in this group, and these are the people who, when you have questions, can really help answer those and guide that. So, if no questions right now, I think we can move on to your presentation.
Yeah, I did put one together just because
Love
I
that.
love putting together PowerPoints. I put together so many.
So
But,
Tim had loaded it up
Great.
on the computer.
Yeah, and with a site like this, I mean, there's so many beautiful pictures of everything, so it makes it really easy. I didn't incorporate a lot into this because I wanted to really just kind of stay on the residential soils
Click the share button.
area.
Well, I'm looking for where the,
Is it saved in Teams? Tim, where did you save Linda's presentation?
It is in Teams in the packet.
that's right,
Go
If I don't
to
miss mine.
probably
Go
work
back to-
sessions.
Good, I think,
Click on the 2/11/2025, it says work session 2/11/2025.
Oh, you're
Click
at
that.
9 a.m.
Yeah,
okay, I need
So
to go to
click
the
on the
PM,
one, yeah.
perfect.
in the packet.
Thank you. And here we are. Thank you for your patience. And I need to go back and share my screen. I'm getting this all figured out.
You're so
being
good at
the-
this already,
I'm basically IT.
yeah.
Okay, and we can,
Tiny little bar.
I know, get out of the way.
Tinier one.
Tinier, bye-bye. Okay, and we'll move this. Do you want to drive this, or do you want me to do it and I can switch, whatever you want?
I can do it.
Okay, there you are.
Let's see.
I think if you move the little bar at the bottom, I'm good, Andy, thanks. If you move that thing, or click more on the bottom bar.
The black bar
The black bar, yes.
to the right. Go far
All the way
right.
to, yeah, click more and hide floating meeting controls.
2 down.
2 down. There you go.
Yeah, and then you can see the play button for the PowerPoint on the bottom.
This
This
guy.
one?
Yeah, that, sorry,
Oh, that
That's a
one,
weird
Yeah.
icon, I would have never found that one.
click that,
okay.
yay.
Wow.
Just learn that for later.
I love PowerPoint, that's the only reason.
Okay.
So the California Beach Superfund site is rather large, it's 18 square miles. And it incorporates the city of Leadville, the historic mining district, and then the section along the Arkansas River, which is mainly the Arkansas River floodplain. The mining district is pretty much this area as far as when Kyle and I talk about the mining district, although there's mining all throughout the county. We focused mainly on the more heavily contaminated areas that were influencing the water going into the Arkansas River. And so that's our target area there. And then the residential areas, and I'll show you in another slide what it included as part of the Superfund site, but it includes commercial areas, your recreation areas, athletic areas. And so it's zoned for a variety of uses. So the city of Leadville itself is part of OU9. And then the water in the area comes from Parkville Water, but you know that. So the mining in the area was extensive, starting in the 1800s. There were 42 smelters, which is a lot. A lot of communities might have 2, so there were a lot of smelters. So as you can see, there's slag piles in various areas throughout the county.
That city.
Yeah, acid drainage permeated the watershed. At the time, it was deemed a Superfund site. Tailing piles dotted along the Arkansas River and in the floodplain. And in the mining district, that 8 square mile area that I was pointing out, I mean, there's 1,300 mining shafts, 155 tunnels, 2,000 of each the prospect holes in the cavities, and hundreds of miles of underground workings that are flooded with water.
Hundreds of miles of
yeah.
like tunnels?
Yeah,
Oh my god.
yeah, because
I
they'd
thought
have
it was-
like the different levels, right? So
Yeah.
one mine might have like 30 levels to it, so extremely extensive, especially up in the Ibex, Drayhurst Gulch area. And so a big part of what Kyle and I do is manage the water that comes out of those networks. There are 2,000 loose rock piles throughout the mining district, and every inch of dirt in the count that Superfund site area was turned over at least once. So they used the slag for road base, different things within the city. It was spread out all over the place, best we can tell. Then, I just hit it, okay. So it became a Superfund site pretty much right when the Superfund law came out. So EPA and the state were trying to kind of find our footing in how do we divide this up so that we can manage and clean up some of the areas. So Superfund has very weird terms called, so a designated area we call an operable unit. So you'll hear us say OU. And the project managers at the time decided to divide it up by the type of contamination, the slag, the waste rock piles, how it was generated, who generated it, and then the tunnels that were coming out. So the Yak, you have the Yak tunnel as one itself, Malta Gulch, which is you know where the black slag piles are on the south of town? It's just a little south of that, back up in the hills. And that has some tailing impoundments which can potentially be used in the future for a repository. That's an idea that we floated, because a repository that was built probably 10 years ago is starting to get full. So that's one area, there's an option. All the slag areas, mainly generated by the railroads, because when they would load the car, the slags would fall off and we'd have fine pieces of slag there were put as one. And Denver Rio Grande was the main company in charge of that cleanup. The upper California Gulch is just where the Yak treatment plant is, that whole area in there, Iowa Gulch. The smelters were grouped together, Drayhurst Gulch, which is the mining district up 5th Street. The patchy tailing piles, which is where the snow accumulates after they shovel it. So I went over there today to see how that was going.
Would you mind admitting that person, please? Thank you.
And
And then hit more. Bottom right, yep. Nice, thank you.
let's see. Lower California Gulch, so that's you know where the bus barn is.
So that was also right here.
Yeah.
Just a cell.
And I have a map in here too,
Okay.
residential
Oh.
soils, Oregon Gulch, and then site-wide water quality is pretty much the whole site. So over time, and at the request of the community and the commissioners at the time when I started in 2009-10, had asked that we start finishing and completing and administratively closing out the operable units that were completed. And so we started that process, and to date, 9 of these have been completed and removed from the Superfund list. There's an official process that we go through there, and we call that deleted from the national priorities list. That's what that means.
One thing I'll tag on to that, so even though we've deleted those OUs from the national priorities list, because there's waste left in place, our responsibilities don't necessarily go away. We have a process where every 5 years, we look at the work that we've done to determine whether or not it's still protective. So even though those OUs have been deleted, we still look at them every 5 years and just make sure that the work that we've done is still safe.
Wow.
And then we do operations and maintenance on them too.
Correct, yeah.
It's been a
That's-
huge curiosity for me. I'm so grateful that you all are talking about this. To understand that history and then what accountability is still available. et
Certainly,
cetera.
I mean,
Yeah.
one thing that we'll say is that there's a lot of history at this site,
Yeah.
there was a lot of work done, so even Linda and I still find out different new things about the site when we get like questions, we have to do a little bit of research, so it's a lot that we're gonna be throwing at you, don't feel the need to like retain it all at once, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us and we'll give you the answer.
Cool.
And then we know like the people here have lived through this experience, and so when Kyle and I talk, we're streamlining things, and we know people have different perceptions of how things went, and we honor that because they were here when this happened, and we've gotten a lot of really good community input into some of the remedies that we've done, and so we do welcome community input anytime, so. So the site was placed on the National Priorities List in 1983. And there's a long story behind that, but I won't get into it. And of the OUs that were designated the 12, this is the ones that were deleted from the National Priorities List. So we're still doing work in the Strayhurst Gulch area. That particular area was the most complicated and difficult for many reasons. The historic nature, the recreational aspect, property owners, preferences, and you might have heard stories of people throwing themselves in front of bulldozers and saying, "Not my historic waste rock piles." Have you heard that story?
I have not.
Okay. So
When was that?
it was when Ken Klober was state senator, and so he went down to the Capitol and said, no budget for History Colorado until we get this worked out. So there's been a lot of political influence in Lake County throughout the history of the Superfund site. So so if you look at our remedy there, you'll be like, why did you do this? This isn't probably the most efficient way to do it. So there's usually a story and a history of why we do that, the way we do. So those Merlot ponds up there that's part of the reason why we have them. And I'm a chemist, I'm not really comfortable with the pH 2 out in the public realm, but so far we haven't had any issues with people getting injured or, yeah. So that is, Kyle and I set priorities for this year, and that's one of our main priorities is to kind of line up that area. Let's see, and then the other two operable units that still, even though they're in operations and maintenance, they need institutional controls, which we've been doing county ordinances that put, I don't wanna say limitations, but
Controls, they're pretty bare bones, and that's by design. When the first ones were being put in place, there was the concern that they could potentially limit to redevelopment, activities like that, and so while we do have the controls in place, they are set up in a way to allow the redevelopment to happen and just be flexible for future use. So while we have them for most of the OUs, we still need them for OUs 6, 11, and 12.
and we drafted some before COVID, and then COVID got them delayed. So
Yeah, COVID, and there was a public perception that because we were trying to pursue a path to deletion, that we weren't trying to walk away from the site. And so when we do revisit these ICs, we need to make sure that we communicate to the community that we still have obligations at the site, and just because we're trying to kind of tick this box, it doesn't mean that we're going away completely.
That's a couple of conflicting perceptions that you're trying to manage over the history of this site is don't touch this, this is my history, but
Don't
also
leave.
like, don't leave, this is hurting me.
Yeah, and honestly, a lot of that dichotomy is like opinions back in the day when these, like, all this work was first happening, and then perceptions now that we've been here for a while and we've done all this work. People are starting to see the benefits of it, and they don't want us to necessarily go away, so that's where some of that comes from.
Yeah, it makes sense, it's just interesting.
Yeah.
And the way Kyle and I manage it is we're very purposeful when we come here and talk and the things that we do. And when our input is needed, like on the institutional control, if they go to the building department and say, I'm gonna build on this property and it's known that there's lead there, then they come back and Kyle will look at it and see if it needs a materials management plan or not. But we do that very quickly, like usually within a week or two, we'll get back to them, give clear direction on what they need to do, how they need to fill it out. And we haven't had any issue, we've been doing this for over 10 years, and before Kyle, it was Alyssa and Craig. So I think our timeliness is a way that we manage it too. And then we also take citizens' concerns seriously, and we respond to those too in a quick manner.
Yes.
Oh, and the other thing I know about Leadville is they don't like money to be wasted. So we put a high value on not wasting any funds for this site. And then, so this just shows ones that are a little grayed out, those are the operable units that have been deleted. So they're pretty much the central part of the Superfund site, so it's these outskirt ones that don't have them on.
Yeah, the one that's not actually shown on here is the site-wide groundwater, which encompasses the whole site boundary area.
So the residential soils, you can see this is a really large area, and the institutional control for that is the blood testing program. Because children don't just stay in their yard, they go everywhere. So I think it's more effective. Let's see. So part of our process, the Superfund process is pretty long, but we do feasibility studies, we do research on where lead is and how it's affecting people. And through that process, we do a proposed plan on what our preferred remedy is of that. And so the Lake County Community Health Plan was chosen as the remedy. And it includes free services for outreach to the county, which is an educational component on how to prevent exposure to lead, testing for lead, and then if there's an elevated blood lead, then the health department does a consultation and monitor, and they have a interview form where they interview the parent or the caretaker to really kind of pinpoint what's actually causing the elevated blood lead. And that's been highly effective. I only know one instance where we did complete remediation of the whole home, every different potential source of lead in there. And the child still had a high blood lead, and we believe it was because of an ingestion, what they were eating. And so the program does have an educational component on what foods could have high levels of lead. But I mean, you can't control like what happens in a household, we can just provide information. And if they go through the interview process and the consultation and monitoring and the blood lead's not coming down after like a good faith effort of it, and that's usually 3 to 6 months, then we look at is a remediation warranted, and then that's a decision that's made within the work group. And then it goes over to the state, and then the state does a official investigation. And if the work group decides to do remediation, then the state actually hires a contractor and does the remediation. It's been highly effective in protecting the human health here. In our last 5-year review, we found it to be protective. And how did we get here? So ASARCO, are you all familiar with ASARCO?
No.
Okay, it was one of the main mining companies here, and the Guggenheim fortune was made.
Yeah.
American Smelting and the rest.
Refining.
ASARCO has since gone bankrupt in North America. It's pretty much North America. So they started these remediations, cleaning up the parks, the schools, the daycares, and then they were working on the homes. So the program looks at a lead concentration less than 3,500 milligrams per kilogram. So they removed soils that were higher than that. The other ones were left in place, and then the institutional control went in there. So the program itself is considered a pilot remedy. So Superfund typically only cleans up soil that have high concentrations of lead. We don't go in the home, we don't look at any other source of that. That was mandated by Congress. So in the 90s, ASARCO felt very strongly that there are multiple sources of lead and we should look at all of them. And so they, along with some of the elected officials and the project manager at the time, who was, you might know her, Rebecca Thomas, she's on the city council here. So they went to Congress. And Congress heard what they were talking about, and then EPA headquarters approved this as a pilot program. So that some of the ASARCO sites within the country have a similar program, but I will say this is the Cadillac program. Like, this is the one that CDC envisioned when they started creating a blood reference level and then also lowering it, that CDC would give money to the counties to run programs like this. Unfortunately, CDC has not been funded very well for a long time. And this model has been used within the state of Colorado, where other counties will come to the Lake County Public Health and ask for help in finding out why a particular child has a high blood lead. So all this came through, the community felt very strongly that leaded fuel was a significant source, and they were right. I mean, it was at the time. And they felt very strongly about the multi-exposure pathway, especially because, I mean, you can't just keep your kid in your yard.
Yeah, and part of the multi-exposure comes from all the smelters that were present. During that process, the lead can be dispersed throughout the air, and then it'll settle in homes and yards and stuff like that. So that was another reason why, we don't just look at the yards, we actually look inside the home as well.
So, let's see, so this is just talking about the remedy. It started in 1999. Trying to see if there's stuff we didn't talk about. So the program itself, when ASARCO started it, so the kids went first. So if any home had a child in it, ASARCO would go to their home, and ASARCO did a really good job of catering to the homeowner. When you clean up a yard, there's shrubbery, flowers, things that they really like that if you disturb them, you can have a disgruntled homeowner. So they were very good. They replaced things within the home, faucets, tubs. They even found that like some of the blinds on the windows were by this one child's crib, and the child was sucking on them, and that they found out that that was the source. So it was really good at identifying for the children. So after all the homes were looked at with the children, then they opened it up to just the general public.
we should probably take a quick step back. So the reason why your children were emphasized throughout this whole process is they are more susceptible to the impacts from lead poisonings. And so that's why we, even our outreach today is focused towards children in that 0 to 72 months timeframe. But we'll still provide testing for kids that are older than that.
And nursing parents, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Pregnant and nursing, yeah.
Sometimes you do it adults too, like if they request.
We will, absolutely.
Yeah,
We're
we
not
always
gonna-
say yes.
Yeah, we always say yes, but we really focus our outreach towards the folks who are gonna be most likely impacted by high blood levels. Yeah. But
Are there
everyone,
symptoms of high blood levels, like any visible symptoms?
I don't think visible, so my understanding is it's like developmental delays, and things along those lines. So maybe not, immediately physical effects, but, long-term, delays, and you guys could probably speak a little bit more to it than I can.
heard anecdotes about like behavioral issues too that were then maybe related to higher blood levels and so development, behavioral, things like that.
Yeah, and at really high concentrations, you can have nausea, dizziness, but those are like 45
acute
milligrams per
toxic.
kilogram, it's super high, and they can do chelation therapy and things to bring it down when it is at those high levels. But we have not seen those levels here.
Yeah, we're more looking at like people who are having prolonged, slightly elevated is what we're more likely going to see, which could then have developmental impacts, so anyone who's at all slightly elevated, and we don't see extremely high, since I've been around, we haven't seen extremely high, but slightly elevated and trying to mitigate that and figure out why that is.
Is that part of a normal blood panel?
No.
For Amy?
No, this is, it's a whole separate way of testing that we have a blood lead testing machine that like typically doctors' offices don't really do, doctors send their kids to us for it, it's not really common, and we even need to work on some education, like folks who live in, or people go see primary care in Summit County or in surrounding counties, and they don't even fully understand how important it is if you live in Leadville to have your blood lead levels checked. So it's not everywhere is this super common. Like Leadville is the leading place in this, of having this, of testing this, of mitigating it. So there are other counties that have probably some who should be doing this more, but we are,
Lead, no.
yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I have another site, the Central City Clear Creek site, it's pretty much the whole Clear Creek watershed. And we've been trying to get Gilpin and Clear Creek County on board to do the same thing, and they're getting there, but it's been a struggle to get them up to like the same level that you guys are at. So, having this kind of in place already is hugely beneficial, I think, for the county.
Yeah, and when Pueblo was getting theirs set up, they did consult with Lake County, which was a really nice resource, cause they don't necessarily trust us as much as they trust like their peers, so that was super helpful for Pueblo. So the objectives of the remedy are based on what the CDC levels were at the time, reference level was at the time, so 10 and 15. But the overall objective is to reduce exposure to children. So that's what our plan says, but in actuality, when it moved to 5, which was, I think that was like 10 years ago, nurses started doing intervention if it was 5 or above. And then now, I think if it's, I don't know if you did, it's 3.3.
Yeah, so recently, last year, EPA put out a guidance that essentially had the project managers look at impacts of a 3.5 or higher.
So this is where any residential property owner was afforded the opportunity to have their yard investigated. And we did a last call, notifying people through mailing them, putting it in the newspaper and community outreach. So every property owner in the county in that residential area got a letter. And then because Asarco went bankrupt, EPA finished those cleanups in the summer of 2009. So overall, at the site, over 100 properties have been investigated. Of those, 25 had a soil remediation, so they had other sources of lead that were impacting the children. Some of those 100 or 1,000 may or may not have soil removals, could have had dust, paint replaced. In the program, it created the work group, and that consists of Lake County, the state, and EPA. So when we vote, each one of those entities has a vote. Generally, we don't have any, like, it's not usually majority, like we don't have 2-to-1 or, we try to come to a consensus before we vote. So the program today, it's the multi-pathway, community-based outreach for all different sources of lead. And those can include soil, dust, interior or exterior paint, foreign candy, and any other items that contain lead. And our goal is to reduce exposures to lead. And then they have many educational materials that are given to the interested parties. So, do you wanna talk about like your outreach that you do,
Yeah,
the different ones?
yeah. Yep, so people can come to public health for blood lead testing, and we try to promote that, but realizing that there's lots of barriers for people to come to public health, real or perceived, we are really working on doing outreach. So that's looking like we're going to Bright Start biannually at the start of the year, August, and then again in January, and trying to test all of the kids there whose parents will give us the consent to do so. Like, we are in Lake County, all kiddos 1 to 6 should really be getting their blood lead levels test, as well as pregnant and nursing people. And so I also was coordinating with folks at the center to try to go there. So targeting these age groups and going to them. We've gone to the school during like parent-teacher conference nights, during registration, any time that we have like opportunities for touch points of the community, we will go, we'll bring our blood lead stuff, we'll set up, and anyone can come in and get their blood lead levels tested, and we try to like just promote that, do education. And we're talking about trying to figure out how to better do outreach to pregnant and nursing people in this community too. It's hard, we don't have like like Dr. Lisa was talking about, we don't really have someone who offers those services, so we don't have like just a provider we can go to and partner with. Another thing is we have worked hard to have Nurse Family Partnership in WIC, who are services that are housed within our same building that help mothers of new and young children, and like letting them know what our services are. And we did have a wonderful woman who was in the same building as us, Mildred, who worked for WIC, and she would see her patients, so with women, infant, and children, and she does a lot of nutrition education and working with them about accessing healthy food, affording healthy food, getting them whatever they need to get that. And then she would ask if they'd had their blood lead levels done, or how they were on their immunizations, and she would essentially like walk them to our front desk, and they would register, and they would get their blood lead tested right then and there. Which was really, really great connection that we had. And unfortunately, Mildred retired. I think she came out of retirement to do this job, has retired again, and now we don't actually have a WIC person in-house at Lake County Public Health, and we can talk more about that later. I'm not really sure where that's gonna go, but we're trying to, we have a new Nurse Family Partnership person, Jenny. I just reached out to her, reminding her that we have these programs and to encourage everyone. So anywhere we can think of that we can like connect people or do outreach, we're trying to do that. And so last year, our clinical programs coordinator, Ashley, started in February, and this was her first year in this role doing all this blood lead, and we tested, and she did 86 blood lead tests in 2024. And then our goal for 2025 is to increase that by 5%, and already in 1 month, January, we've done 18.
Yeah.
I think so, we're well on, and we've got outreach lined up, and so yeah, we're working hard to do that education, to get out to test people, and
How invasive is the test? Is it pinprick?
it's a pinprick, so for us, not invasive, for young kids,
children?
horrible, but because it's a prick, and the toughest part is then it's kind of a slow trying to get enough blood, which a young kid watching you like try to massage blood out of their hand can be pretty triggering, but Ashley does an amazing job with young kids. And so she, it's not a job I would like to do, but she does it well. And so it's not super painful, it's a small, almost like getting your blood sugar,
Yeah.
but then it's just it's not painful, but trying to get that blood to come out and
The
little
whole
kids
drop.
seeing that, yeah. But we have a huge treasure
much training.
chest of toys that they get to get a toy afterwards, just like with immunizations, and that helps, so. And that's what we find, like, I think she's recently been going to Bright Start and parents will sign all of the paperwork beforehand and then she goes in and it's like, it's less of this scary thing where the parents come in and she just goes and she tests them all and they all, lots of them get tested, and I think it's a little less dramatic in that way, where it's like, this is just what we're doing,
Look, I
and not a lot of
sent
build up, yeah,
this, I sent
is
this
very
to
cute.
Julia, that's Robin, my son, helping her Aurelia, like, be okay with her pinprick. You can see that she's been crying.
Aw.
But this was like 5 years ago.
But kids in Lake County, many of them are, like, they know what this is.
Yeah, they get
That's
used to it.
They do.
The one thing I'll add, I don't know if it's covered in a future slide, but so the only way to kind of enter into the process to potentially have your home remediated under the current LCCHB is through the bloodlet testing. Once we finish that voluntary effort in the mid-2000s, that was the end of that process, and now you have to have an elevated bloodlet to have your property remediated.
That was such a bummer, cause I remember my daughter, she had an elevated blood lead, but then we were able to get it back down. But then we had a friend, Jake Mormon, who just came and tested our soil, and we found huge amounts of lead. But since she no longer had an elevated level, there was no funding to help with that.
So part of that is, all of this work is currently funded through settlement dollars that
Yeah.
we have. Linda might be, trying to talk about that, but so, it's really an effort to preserve those funds, and, the one thing that we can say is, through the blood lead testing and in our education, we have been able to reduce the amount of actual remediations that we have to do, so preserving those funds, and you address the concern, which is the elevated blood lead level. Yes, there's still potentially contamination in your property, but we get to the root cause.
Having that high level on your property doesn't necessarily negatively impact you living there, unless, it's only if the kid is then playing in it, getting that in their mouth and all of that, but you can have elevated levels, and as long as everyone's taking their shoes off and the pets aren't, I mean, you can live
manage it.
healthfully,
Yeah.
Means the kids aren't eating dirt anymore.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to prevent you as a personal property owner from taking the steps that we would do. So if you wanted to import, material and, and put it on your yard and then resod it, you could totally do that. We can even talk you.
That's the cost
It's the cost,
the thing
yeah.
that is
Yeah,
available for
but we could talk you through that process and explain to you, if you take these steps, which is the steps that we would take,
Yeah.
you could do it and be safe.
some. Yeah.
but yeah, the funding for that exact thing is not that was
Always available.
a moment in time.
Yeah.
That, and they get more expensive every year, every time we do it.
Yeah, totally.
So, I think the last two remediations that we did, they were several $100,000 per property. And so when we're
Which,
talking,
yeah.
we, about a couple $1 million left with our settlement dollars. We
That's
really
it.
want to make sure that when we do commit to do that cleanup, it's, it's really required, really
Yeah.
necessary.
Cause
Yeah.
otherwise that funding will go so much further with what we're doing with the testing, education. We could fund this program for a long time with that approach.
Yeah.
And very short with the remediation approach.
Totally.
Yeah, it can be a can of worms, I think one of the last ones, we spent more than the house was actually worth.
Yeah, the very last property that we did, the issue that we ran into is there was lead not only in the soil but in the home as well. But the home was in a deteriorated state, so once we started going in and trying to do, implement some of our cleanup options, we ran into the roof wasn't good enough, so we had to replace the roof, the electrical wasn't up to code, we had to, get that all up to code, that was the stuff that we got into. Not every property is like that, but
A lot in Lake County are.
those are the worms that you start getting into once you go into people's homes.
Some folks really got hooked up.
Yeah.
Sure, man.
Yeah.
Roof,
But at the same time, I mean, that in the particular scenario, they were, living with elevated blood lead with their children for an extended period of time, so that really was the option to deal with that scenario, so it was costly, but it was also warranted.
Yeah. And unintentionally, like holistic health was served.
Yeah, Linda or Kyle, sorry, this is Melanie. I don't know, I hope I didn't miss it, but do one of you wanna just touch on briefly why the cleanup standard is so much higher in Leadville than, say, if somebody comes along and compares it to the state level?
Sure, yeah, we could talk a little bit about that. So on one of the slides, we had a 3,500 number on there. That's our trigger criteria, that's our cleanup number for lead. If you look at any other lead site across the country, it's not even gonna come close to that. And the 3,500 number was selected through a number of studies and research that was done back in, I wanna say it's like the late 90s, early 2000s.
When you say not even come close to that, do you mean like that is more stringent or less?
This is, no, it's high, it's high. So right now, the CDC is recommending, what is it,
It's 100 or 200.
yeah, 100 or 200, it's versus 3,500.
So just bathing in lead.
Yeah, but so there's a lot of factors that went into that, selecting that number. A lot of them are site-specific conditions, having to do with like the amount of snow cover that you have throughout the year. Leadville literally, there's not the access to the ground cover throughout the year that, that would be, common at other sites. Actually, and so the whole Superfund process is community input driven, and there was a lower number initially proposed, but the community came back and said they wanted it higher because it would have meant less like cleanup and impacts at that time. So there's a lot of factors that went into that number.
Stubborn mountain folks.
Jeez,
There's a lot of factors that went into that number, but getting back to what I was talking about earlier, how we do review the protectiveness of the remedy every 5 years, that's something that we also look at is that 3,500 number still protective, do we think it's not protected anymore? And a lot of what helps us make that determination are the metrics that we collect through the LCCHB program, looking at the percentage of kids with elevated blood leads compared to the total population, stuff like that. So we can use those metrics to evaluate the performance of the remedy. This is one particular item that we're gonna be looking at with kind of more specifically during the next 5-year review because of the lead guidance that came out. At least as things stand right now, there's been a lot of change that's come out of the new administration, and so that it's not to say that they may make a decision that that has us look at this scenario differently by the time we get to our 5-year review, but as things stand right now, this is something that we'll be looking at a little bit closer, so.
And the 100 to 200 is based off of a lead compound that's very bioavailable. There's different types of lead compounds in Leadville depending on where it came from. So EPA did a bioavailability study back in the 90s, and it's very low bioavailability, and so that factored into the 3,500 too. So it was like there wasn't that time of period where children would play outside in the dirt. The types of lead and its bioavailability, and I think there's one more factor. So it was site specific, and that's how we came up with it.
Nice.
And then I'm gonna talk about the blood lead reference level when CDC set it. So everything's based on statistics, right, in the bell curve. And so CDC when they came up with the 10, they said we don't want children. We only want 2.5% of the children to have an elevated blood lead. And back when they first set that, like in the 70s, 90s, there were a lot of children nationally that had above a 10, so that number was higher. And so as things got better, then they're like, what's the new 2.5%? And then that went down to 5, and now they're like, what's the new 2.5%? Now they're down to 3.3, which is what the machines can actually measure. So as you can see, you get down to 0, and that's just not practical. And the reference level itself is really like, it's kind of like the red light that says, hey, something might be wrong, why don't you do more investigation? It doesn't mean if you have that number that something really bad's gonna happen to your child. And so, you know, I'm very wary of not scaring parents, because if you catch it early and change the behaviors, they're probably not gonna have any problems, and the blood levels come down so quickly up here. When I first started in 2009, I'm like, oh, it's gonna take a year and a half for them to come down. They were coming down in like 2-3 months, so the program works, and I'm a big advocate for it. And so the money for the program came from ASARCO, and they put that in a trust outside EPA, and it's currently with CompuShare, and that's where we draw down the money, and that money is available to the work group. And the things that it can go for are outlined in our work plan and trust agreements. The program itself typically costs $200,000 to $300,000 a year, which is really reasonable. And the trusts reimburse the state and the county for their costs. Actually, we give them money ahead of time, we put it in a budget. EPA, my costs are not reimbursed by the trust, because SARCO didn't like EPA, so it didn't make it into the trust agreement, which is completely fine. And let's see, so currently we have about, it's a little over 2.7 million in the account. So in the trust agreements, there are provisions that if the program wasn't to exist anymore, or the county said we don't wanna do this anymore, that money would go to the county for health related programs. So that's what would happen if the program were to fold.
And just to be clear, like that money is safe from,
Yeah, what's going on right now?
yes,
Yes.
everything, that's what I
Yeah.
assumed, and I just figured it'd
Cause
be-
it's in a fund, it's in a
It's in, and it's in a bank that's not related, and it's, they can't touch it.
Right,
So are we pulling out of that $200 to $300 that it costs every year to do, 300,000, yeah, that it costs every year to do, how much of that is being taken out of the trust? Is it the whole thing?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, just wanted to double check.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be a little bit less
Yeah.
than that, because of the like education piece of the program.
Yeah.
We haven't actually had to do any home remediations in the last few years. So over the last couple of years, it's been lower than that, but in a year where we have to do a home remediation, it would
That's what you're
be
looking
that
at.
number, yeah.
So then on years where you don't have to do a home remediation, let's say we can keep it at a level where we don't have to do home remediation and all the prevention is working. Like how many years will that trust get us at like the base rate?
Well, I can't remember exactly what the county's help, or what your budget is, but
It depends on the year,
Yeah,
so
it's-
we haven't.
it's normally like 50.
I can help you answer that.
Do you have it
'Cause we
pulled up
still-
right now?
Well, really the consistent funding that we pull for this every year is for the staff salary or partial staff salary at public health for the blood lead nurse. Right, if there is a need for remediation, it would have to go back to the LCCHP for a vote to draw down more of that funding. So I think for this year, it was like maybe 40K
Because
what we
the same,
pulled out of it.
that's great, thank you, Tim. The person who we pay to do this, our clinical programs coordinator, is also funded in part by our immunization
Yeah.
funding, and a lot of it was, we're also using up the last of our COVID funding to help pay this person. Going forward, more of their salary will likely have to come out of this blood lab, but still, it's under 100,000, usually about half of that.
Yeah,
And it's supplies and salary and,
in terms of the state costs, if we're not talking about investigation or remediation, it's more or less just my time for like meetings like this, or, you know, if I answer a random question, so, you know, not a significant, you know, drawdown.
so years and years. And then
27 years.
we make interest, do we make interest on that?
It's
Yes.
invested.
Yeah, so,
yeah.
Okay, great.
so the
And
less
then
we
the
pull out, the
commissioners
more
have
we
the
make.
option of like changing the investments that it's in. They haven't changed over the past 4 years, just because there wasn't a commissioner that was interested in like looking at that, but if someone did, it says it's fairly conservative options that are in the trust agreement that are available. But they still bring back a pretty good rate, so.
Great, thank you.
And then as Kyle mentioned in our last 5-year review, we looked at what remediations were done, is the program effective or not? And as I mentioned earlier, about 25% of the time it's really from the soil, so if we were just removing the soil, we would miss these other 75%. And some of the contributors were the lead-based paint, remodeling of homes when they start scraping paint. Sometimes it's the profession of one of the parents. We had a welder who was tracking some lead in the house. Fishermen's, their sinkers can have lead in it, ammunition can have lead in it. And then on the EPA page, we have some videos that if you ever wanted to watch, there's some interesting ones about how the remediation was done and what it looks like now. And we do get a lot of people that move up here that have no idea that it was a Superfund site. So this just kind of captured some of the history. And I don't know if you heard of Doc Smith before, the veterinarian that was instrumental. So he's on some of these videos. We wanted to capture him before he went to the next realm. So and then our EPA site has lots of documents on there too. So we try to keep that updated and available to the public.
This was great, it's great, I learned a bunch too. This is
Yeah,
really
me too, I
helpful.
loved it.
Yes, Tim.
Alright, thank you. I wonder, before more general Q&A, Linda and Kyle and Melanie, I wonder if you can talk about other ways we interact with EPA and CDPHE and with Melanie's council, so like asbestos, all those other fun things we talk about.
Yeah, so in general, we are happy to answer any questions or try to answer any questions you might have about other projects that are going on in the city and county. Regarding asbestos, there was an apartment complex that had an asbestos spill, and then there was some back and forth on what was being done about that, and I kind of passed along some of the questions and concerns that the county had to a point of contact I have at the state. It's a separate division, it's the Air Pollution Control Division, but that's just an example of how we're kind of happy to try to track down the right information or get you guys talking to the right people. So it doesn't have to be necessarily limited to the focus of the LCCHP. If there's any environmental concerns throughout the site, if we don't have the answer, we can try to get you the answer.
Yeah, so we're kind of like the gatekeeper, because even though we're just the Superfund program, like within EPA, we have our water, air, the 404 permits, all that. So I will say, like, when people come to me and say, how do I get a 404 permit? Like, I'll go through and like try to figure it out. And I'm an environmental professional. It's sometimes not easy to track down the right place for these people to go to. So we try to take the brunt of that and like do the work so that when we go back to the citizen, we can tell them this is exactly who you need to contact, and we can try to streamline things. So any environmental topic, like we're happy to kind of figure out where's the right entity for that to go to, because it gets confusing, like if I just said, I'm just Superfund, you need to contact water, like,
Yeah, and then
so we try to help with that.
we're also involved in other non-site related activities. There's a major Excel energy project going on that they're replacing pole structures throughout the county that we're involved in. We've been from the periphery involved with the CJK milling operations and them trying to get their permit. We're in a position where we can't directly give them support, but we've helped them, with access to groundwater monitoring wells and, so on and so forth. So there's other non-site related things that we also kind of are aware of and can answer questions about.
So, like the mining district is just endless tailing pile after tailing pile after tailing pile. But there's so much that people always have their brainstorming about what to do up there, what's, what are like some of the possible consequences if we start disturbing these tailing piles up there for like recreation or commercial or industrial or something like that, like, is this just gonna, is like some of these heavy metals or some of the lead, can that like adhere to dust and float into the air or like?
Yeah, I mean, so that's I think a really complicated question to answer.
Okay.
And depending on the use scenario, our answer is gonna, vary, our input for a recreational use scenario is gonna be much different than a commercial mining scenario. I'll say that off the bat. In general, the work that we've done has either encapsulated or immobilized waste to a point where it's not really affecting the environment currently. There's a few areas where we still need to do work, specifically in that Straight Horse Gulch area. We have done some capping of mine waste piles and channelization of surface water, but there's more work to be done up there. Outside of that, we don't have much, we call it remedial action, but we don't have much cleanup work plans for, like areas up above or up north or west of the immediate Straight Horse Gulch outside of town. So if you guys were looking to, open that up to recreation or, commercial mining or anything like that, we'd be happy to, sit in on those conversations and, give our best 2 cents, but, it's hard to say, to kind of say, cover every scenario.
So case by case.
Yeah, more or less, yeah, and we, that's kind of the approach that Linda and I have taken over time. I mean, there's been a few Trout Unlimited reclamation projects up in the area that we weighed in on, and so on. So, when those issues come up, you can reach out to us.
Okay, cool, thank you.
And some of the acid.
Can I address that additionally and then answer Tim's question too, just more broadly? Commissioner Lee, in addition to, what Kyle offered in terms of being a resource, I think there is an important discussion that we can have at a later date about the potential for liability to attach when parts of the Superfund site that have already been capped and closed are disturbed. And so one of the things that I'm about to do in response to a question that I got from Chris Floyd is send you all a memo on a new bill that's working through the Colorado legislature that is supposed to make it easier to clean up waste rock piles and other sort of legacy remnants of mining. So I'll be sending you a note on that. But there are ways that folks can get themselves in trouble if you get into areas that have already been, subjected to a final remedy. Those things that Kyle and Linda are looking at every 5 years to make sure, they're still in place, they're still operating. But that said, there's a lot of opportunity up there, if done correctly. And we've looked at various things in the past in terms of options. And so that can be done too. But you'll want to read the memo that's going to be coming from me on the waste rock piles and the bill that's going through the legislature. I think there might be some hope with that. But the other thing, going back to Tim's kind of question generally, is just making sure that you all know that in my role, so Linda and Kyle obviously are both with, the federal government and the state government. I am your private legal counsel. So, while I am around and sort of function, we all have worked together for all of these years. My role is certainly not limited to the Superfund site or, anything related to the LCCHP, anything environmental. My prior firm, we did a lot of emergency planning and response work. So, there's some of that we've done as well. So anything that comes up, if you've got a question, feel free to reach out. And if I can answer a question quickly for you, I'm happy to. If it's something we need to dig a little more deeply into, we can certainly do that as well. But My practice is broad. I do air, water, waste, everything from, old gas stations and dry cleaners to mining sites and kind of everything in between. So, and Tim knows, I've worked with him for several years now. I think we've got a good relationship with the county, being generally available if you need to reach out. So happy to do that.
Thank you.
Melanie, it's Matt Bullock here. What do you mean by a lot of opportunity up there?
Well, I just think if people make it easier under the law to do cleanup without attaching liability, which is part of a bill that just went through the federal government, but also protecting the county. For example, the bill that's going through will define what is and isn't, a remedial activity, what isn't a mining activity related to these waste rock piles and other things. So I think whereas in the past, the county over the years, we've had these different proposals come through. People wanted to remine tailings or, do various things. Linda can probably tell you lots of war stories about all of the sort of opportunities that people have brought before. But I think what's happening is through both the federal legislation that was recently passed, and I can send you a note on that as well, but also what the state of Colorado is trying to do is trying to really define and make it easier for people to do the right thing where there's legacy contamination because of mining.
Yeah, the one thing
You
that we
still
didn't
have to
really,
find somebody who wants to do it and that has the funding to do it, but I think starting to put some more controls in to make it, protective for the local government, for the landowners, for those of you who might, be downstream recipients of contamination if something is not done correctly, I think that's getting a little bit better.
yeah, the one thing that we didn't really hit on in our presentation is Superfund liability, and it's kind of a bear. And if you kind of get crosswise of it, you could be stuck having to pay for cleanup. And so I think that's some of what Melanie was talking about is there could be potential opportunities in the future to do either cleanup or redevelopment and have a kind of clearer path to avoiding some of those liability concerns.
Yeah, so under circular authority is very broad, so anyone that causes an uncontrolled release. And we only use that when it's negligence or nefarious. But people are aware that we can do that. So we have some legal instruments when people wanna buy a property that was contaminated. And some of those are these bona fide purchaser letters that really limit any liability they have as long as they follow certain steps. And so like the judicial center was one of those that went through that process here. So we have tools that are available to make it easier for people to acquire property, make sure it's protective of human health and the environment. And then one of those programs too that works with that is the brownfields program. And there's several brownfields projects that have happened up here. So we have the state has money for that EPA grants them. So we have tools, and I do think under the new administration, they're gonna come up with some other new tools. We don't wanna hinder things, we just wanna make sure that things are handled in a way that would be protective of human health and environment, and that also protects the developer or the person doing the work too, that there's a clear path on how they can do that. So and those are the types of things with Kyle and I work too.
I know we're kind of over time. One thing I just wanted to talk real quick about was kind of logistics for how these meetings typically go. Typically, I will send a Google Meeting invite with the Lake County meeting information, so like the Zoom link and the Zoom information for our quarterly meetings, and I'll send out an agenda ahead of time. Happy to, accommodate any, changes that you guys wanna make to that process, but that is typically how we do it, and if you're all right with, continuing that process, we can just, use that moving forward.
Yeah, you might have to work with Sandra because we don't use Google. We
Yeah,
use Outlook.
Yeah, so essentially you'll have a meeting invite that'll, mark out the time on your
Yeah.
calendar, and then the actual meeting will happen on Zoom.
Yeah.
So,
Got it.
You have
the
that
link.
in there.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so we'll use the publicly noticed Zoom link and all that stuff.
Cool.
And I know that you have, requirements for posting the agenda ahead of time, so I'll make sure that we get that agenda in. But so long as everyone's okay with that process, that's what I'll plan on using moving forward for scheduling these meetings.
Can I ask a real quick question? I realize we're over time, but this is really interesting. Is it okay if I ask?
Yeah.
Okay. The water management as part of this is probably something that will never be closed.
Yeah, so,
You also referred earlier to saying that one of our retention sites is going to be overflowing?
alright, so we have a site-wide soil repository that was built.
Repository, not retention.
Yeah, and that's used for disposal of soils that are excavated during either cleanup activities, we've used it for redevelopment activities and so on. That is getting near capacity, so eventually we'll fill that up and have to come up with another solution. But one of the challenges up here is the Lake County landfill isn't set up to accept the metals contaminated soil. And so the repository was the solution that we came up with for a cheaper and easier way to dispose of those, excavated soils.
How many years do you think we have on our current repository?
It really depends, it's project specific. I believe it's around 30,000 cubic yards of capacity that we have left, and that could be 1 or 2 projects, or that could be a dozen projects, depending on, what the excavation looks
The
like.
fenced in area above the Monroe Belt up Fifth Street.
Yes, yeah. So that's different than our water, the way that we handle water at the site.
Yeah.
There's 2 water treatment plants, neither are owned and operated by the state or EPA. One is owned and operated by the Bureau of Reclamation, and that's the Leadville Mine Drainage Tunnel, just outside of town, and then the other is the one operated by Newmont, the Yak Tunnel. Those operations will likely happen in perpetuity. There's no getting around the issue of the water in the mine pool, and that'll have to be treated for forever. Our responsibilities come in monitoring, we have certain points of compliance to make sure that the water that's being treated is meeting certain standards, and we do that in both surface water and groundwater. That's really where our role in the water in this site is, yeah.
Yeah, and we work real collaboratively with Newmont, the Bureau, state, DRMS, so we've worked really hard to have good relationships with everyone and help each other out in different situations, so that's kind of where we're at with that.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah, that's another agency I guess we didn't highlight, is the Division of Reclamation and Mining Safety. They're the folks to call if a sinkhole opens up or you have like a tunnel added that is open and folks are getting into. They deal with more like the safety side of mining, and not the environmental cleanup.
Okay.
Yeah.
My last question, real quick, is that we had some fun discussions about the bottom of Dutch Henry Hill. That is all coming out of California Gulch. How complicated, or have you had any conversations about potentially like culverting that, or how hard would that be just right there?
I guess I'm not familiar with that specific area.
It's at the bottom of CMC, right
Okay.
behind the sewer.
Okay,
It's like when you're driving into
It's right
CMC,
here.
it's on the right.
Yeah, point it.
okay, and so what's the,
So we
You
have
wanna
this
put a
big,
culvert in.
we have this big tubing hill, sledding hill, and
okay,
it does this big elbow.
yep,
And we owned all the stuff across from the elbow, so if it could just go straight over a culvert where the California Gulch drains out.
There's other parts of California Gulch that have a culvert,
Yeah,
so I think you can do it. And Ann Schneider
Just have
did
confidence.
send us an email about
So-
that. I didn't have any concerns. It's gonna have some heavy metals in there.
right,
The pH of the water should be probably an 8 which is great. You're gonna have a lot of like kind of iron muck stuff in there, but it
Yeah, I
can be
mean,
done.
Yeah, I think that project, putting together a materials management plan on how you would handle the excavated soils would be the first step.
Okay.
But outside of that, maybe, some coordination with the Army Corps. But, off the top of my head, it should be doable.
Okay.
I think
Yeah, that-
sorry, Melanie, I was just saying that I think the intent would be something similar. I think they did up in Steamboat, whatever, where it would just be a temporary culvert put in for the winter and then snow over to so you'd have fun,
Yeah.
not that we'd
Okay.
actually dig it out
No.
and put the
Oh, I
culvert in
understand.
Just like a
permanently.
culvert cap.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Well, that's even less invasive, I mean, if that's the case, then you may not even need a materials management plan if you're just kind of plopping it down and then picking it up.
Okay.
Maybe we circle back to that,
Yeah.
give it a little bit more thought.
Yeah, I didn't wanna get into it too much, I just wanted to get a sense of like, oh no, that's us, we do that, or like, oh yeah, that should be
That
doable.
likely wouldn't be us, but we'd wanna be involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it wouldn't be like a remediation that we would do.
Okay.
Yeah, because there was a bunch of cleanup work along the gulch where they excavated, contaminated sediments and stuff like that, so we would just wanna make sure that that work isn't potentially impacted, but outside of that, I can't think of any major red flags off the top of my head.
Okay, cool, thank
Okay,
you.
Tim, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on a couple things Commissioner also brought up for the repository. We are working on a survey so we know how much space is left at the repository. Doesn't really give you like a timeline because it is project dependent. The one that used it the most was the rail yard development. And I forgot the other point that I was gonna bring up about the repository.
In terms of the repository, Lake County is responsible for managing it while it's active, and then the state will be responsible for closing it when it's reached capacity.
Okay.
Melanie, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, the question that Commissioner Elsa raised about the culvert is precisely the kind of thing that if done incorrectly could create legal liability for the county under CERCLA and otherwise. So I'm really glad that you asked it and you're thinking along those lines. But in addition to consulting with Kyle and Linda about, is this allowed under the remedy, et cetera, we always want to make sure that we're thinking about just the legal liabilities as well. I know a lot of times, government folks think, oh, we have governmental immunity for everything. And that's not true when it comes to CERCLA. So you have to be really careful. It's kind of a beast. And Kyle said something along those lines. And we can do a Superfund or CERCLA primer for you a little bit later down the road. The liability is strict joint and several. So it's really a whopper if you get hit with it. So something like that, just to give you a feel for like another project that came up, they wanted to take some soil from one of the elementary schools and use it to level out the football field once. And I got consulted on that. And at the end of the day, it turns out that we weren't able to do that because the level of contamination in the soil coming from the elementary school would not have been appropriate to use on the football field without a cap, and they weren't gonna cap it and irrigate it and all of these kinds of things. So even the simplest project that you think, oh, this would be a really great thing for the community, it can be. There's just some extra bells and whistles that you sometimes have to tack on and consider. So yeah, great question.
Amazing, thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. That was a great
Oh, wait, I
first
have one more thing.
meeting. And we've got
Yay!
one more thing and then we need to go on.
So, there is potential that the federal government would get shut down. And so I would like to get the budget for this approved and the money wired. So March 14th is like when it could happen.
Budget is due.
As far as, so I have 16 years, I'm kind of in a good spot where I might not get let go, but you never know. So I'd like to get that taken care of. And so Melanie, did we decide we can do email votes on the budget? I didn't know if that had changed.
No, I mean, if it's a vote, I think, you can't all collectively jump on a single email. I think if someone wants to poll the commissioners, I would probably defer to Chris or one of the deputy county attorneys for the process that they like to follow on that, because I don't want to give contrary advice, but I know you definitely can't all just jump on a single email and start having conversation and hold a vote that way.
And so it doesn't count that we've already approved, no, never mind,
No.
okay, great. So we need to set up a time to do that.
Or you prepare the budget.
The budget's prepared.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and then send it to Kyle, and then Kyle will review it, and if he agrees with it, then he sends it to me, and then at that point is when we'll have the vote.
So we can set up a special meeting with the BOCC for that.
And just do like a virtual, like,
Yeah,
okay.
yes.
Yeah, let's do that, cause I don't know,
Thank you for
know,
bringing that up.
there's no rules now anymore,
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, that makes great.
Anything could happen, so I'd like, that's the one thing
Yeah.
I'm like, I need to get this done.
And Lauren and Tim, you all are on that, making sure we get that special meeting scheduled?
Well, I'll reach out to you.
Your
once I have
deadline-
The budget.
Linda, you said your deadline is the 14th? Well, that's when the CR runs out.
Well, that's when they could shut down, I mean, I could be let go tomorrow, so,
We can get you this like tomorrow.
okay.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah.
If you get it to me tomorrow, I'll do a quick review and then get it over to Linda, and then I'll reach out to this group to coordinate that meeting.
And so the money, when it comes, it'll come as a wire, and then I work with the finance person here, you know, we let them know it's coming, we make sure it gets there. I follow like everything to make sure the wire isn't lost or anything bad, so it's in good hands. I've done this about 10 times, so I'll coordinate with the county.
Yeah, and CDPHE won't be requesting any funds this year. We had taken out funds a few years ago when we were doing more cleanup work. Since we haven't done that over the last couple of years, we still have some funding available, so we won't need to request.
Great, thank you. That's when we should look at if we still have fund in that fund. That would be the hard part. Maybe we just request for
I
it.
think we just request.
Okay, great. All right, thank you all so much for coming to Leadville for that meeting, and thank
Nice
you.
meeting you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you,
guys.
Melanie. We
Sorry
appreciate
it's
you.
so stuffy here.
Bye-bye.
We're on trying to fix everything in this room.
It's alright.
I'm so interested.
Yeah, if any questions come up, like after we get out of this meeting, just shoot us an email. So outside of these regular scheduled meetings, my communication with elected officials kind of has to go through chain of command at my office, so if you have a question that you can, maybe pose to, someone else and have them send it to me, that's kind of a workaround.
Okay.
But I don't wanna prevent you guys from reaching out to us. If you have a question, reach out and, I'll work on getting you the answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
We can
Kyle.
vote on the budget now if you wanted.
We can't.
You can't, it's a work session, so it's.
Oh,
yeah,
it's
that's
been publicly noticed.
Sorry.
Okay.
Love having Chris here in the corner. So helpful all day.
No, you all stop.
Yeah, very helpful.
Great.
Thanks, Linda. Good to see you.
Thanks,
Can we
everyone.
open that door?
Yeah,
Yeah, we can,
I need like
Anyway.
60 seconds of fresh air, I'm dying back here.
Thank you
Drive
so
safe.
much.
Thank
Take
you.
care, Linda.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, we've been working really closely with the bloodlet team at CDPHE, because
Okay.
they have a different process than they used to.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're pretty technical.
Sorry, guys.
Well, also, this is right here.
Yeah, if there's any major changes that you think we should be aware of, let us
Okay.
know.
The biggest thing is that they are doing an elevated,
one's going one way,
Okay.
one's going
So like to the,
I mean,
like
like,
to the person that.
yeah,
one's
one
going
not
here,
really,
yeah.
at this
Oh,
point,
yeah.
is
The biggest thing is like
calling
an investigative
his
piece
response
for
is hard for
the
the
state
I
is wanting to do
nursing
all of
community,
that.
testing, cause I would be the
We
one.
can be involved.
Tim and Lauren, do you have a certain vision for how you want this next part to go, I was thinking about sharing starting with what I have
Okay.
and
Does that
then
make sense?
No, that
going
makes
into
sense.
THS, but I don't know if you have a different vision.
Yeah.
Your vision works for us.
Nice to meet you, sir, thanks for
Yeah.
coming.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank
you.
So nice to see you.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah,
Okay.
likewise.
Have a good one.
Drive safe.
Are you on work?
Okay,
Do you wanna let them go first?
sure.
Do y'all need to go though?
Well,
You need,
no, but I will have to feed a baby at some point in time, but not right now.
y'all, how much longer do you have?
I mean, my presentation is 15 slides and I talk
You
fast.
can go. We can sit here. Are we good? We're good. They got through it.
No, they didn't.
Yeah.
No, they got you were an
They
IGO,
were
you were an IOG at till 1:30, weren't you?
No, 1:07.
Okay, sorry,
Cause I'm efficient.
Okay, if you guys wanna go, we
No,
can go. Okay, so we were asked to present and come up with some information to present to you all about federal and state funding and things that are going on with the current administration that could be impacting our funding as well as policy. So obviously, it's a little complicated right now. I need to share this. Because what we've been told from folks from the state and from CDPHE and all these people is like, as of right now, we're just continuing at business as usual. And it's kind of scary because it feels like we're continuing business as usual until we wake up one day and we're not. And so, the idea is trying to plan and be prepared for whatever could come down. So, what I've got here for you, some of this will be review from what I presented to you when we first met. Right here is our 2025 budget, our revenue. This is from the budget book and this was from the previous presentation I did. So our current revenue for 2025 for public health is just under 900,000. And I think it's worth pointing out here, this will come up later, this was our budget from last year. So we have decreased our budget already, okay? And here's our expenditures, matches our revenue. And we have expenditures, I've talked to you about this from a couple of revenue from a couple of different sources. Some is license and permits and miscellaneous, and we'll talk more about our other things besides grant funding, but this is just a quick picture of the full revenue. So we went in and I looked at our 2024 grants and what we received in 2024 and then tried to modify what it might look like in 2025. So this is an approximate 2025 federal grant estimate that does not include the grants we're no longer receiving, like some that are going away from COVID and things like that. So our total estimate with where we're getting our federal funding from these couple of different options is about $116,000 of our budget is federal funds. Okay.
Is that 20%?
I think it is probably less. Yeah, 18. Cause our full budget's 897,000 and we're at. This is our grant, 2025 state grant estimate. And as best as I can tell, this is not federal pass-through, this is our state grants. And this is more, so this comes in at about 210,000, give or take, approximately. So we're looking at, 330,000 of our funding, but something, you got that? Something to consider, so we're seeing a decrease from family planning, so we've had Title X family planning funding, about 50 grand a year that we're going to stop receiving because Summit Community Care Clinic's taking that over and that is going away, but we're also getting an increase in tobacco funding that we have by about 30,000. So this was approximately what we had for state, and then we're being told that we are going to see, public health in general is gonna see about a 5% reduction from the state because of budget cuts at the state level. I don't know exactly where that's gonna come from, but essentially of that 211,000, 20% is about 10. So our state funding should still be just around $200,000. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Our state grants fund it's a small amount of our child fatality prevention program. And child fatality, it's also if we did have a childhood death in the community, that's what that funding would be for, otherwise it's for prevention. Tobacco program, immunization program, environmental health services, and then our emergency planning and response. So that's like a quick snippet of the state, and then our other funding sources that make up our budget. We just talked about the ASARCO Trust for our blood lead program, which seems like it's safe, and we're gonna try to make sure we get that money immediately. Our harm reduction program, that's an opioid settlement funding, we get about $21,000 from that. Not quite a grant. Total. Oh, total, that is what we have received so far. It's not every year, we could get more, sometimes they're just like, and we have more money for you, and then, or this could be it.
I'm so tired.
That is ridiculous.
And our region as a whole gets more, but that's the Lake County.
Yes, I think you're right. Our STEP program, our tobacco program, this is kind of grant, but it's interesting because it's, that money is from Amendment 35, which was a tax increase on cigarettes and tobacco products passed in 2004. And so as long as that still exists, I imagine we'll still see some of that funding, which is great, and we actually are seeing an increase in that this year from $50,000 to $80,000. And then finally, revenue from services. So we charge people who have private health insurance that get vaccines. We charge Medicaid for people who get vaccines. We do retail food licenses and temp event fees. So that's some income from services where we do charge. So that is like the quick look at our budget. So general fund is where we also get money. The general fund currently covers almost all of our senior center budget, with the exception of a small amount we get from the UCOG. The general fund, for public health, you guys pay for staff salaries that aren't currently covered by grants. It helps with general operating expenses like our office supplies, cell phones, internet, utilities, maintenance, and then the rent from our current building, which we were informed today, we can buy. We can buy it if we want. That was big news today, which, may,
She said we've already,
which could, yeah.
she did say we've already paid for
She did
I
say
signed
that.
the
I
check
heard that.
yesterday.
it. Specifically said we've already.
So now really, what we're here, impact of federal funding cuts. So this is gonna come back to some of the things we learned this morning. In 2008, the Colorado Public Health Act required a state board of public health to establish by rule the core public health services that we are so familiar with.
What are those?
Right here. So since 2020, we've been required to ensure these 7 foundational capabilities and services. These are in part federally funded. I don't know if we lose our funding that we're gonna not also have to continue to provide these services, right? And that's like what's interesting, there's the funding aspect and then there's the policy aspect, and I don't know what from the top down public health might look like beyond funding cuts.
And
An
generally,
executive can't overturn a legislative action.
Supposedly.
That's what the courts are weighing in on right
Right
No,
now.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
like, we should assume that we still have to do them.
Yes, and that's what we're doing. We are
Right.
assuming that we are.
Right.
We are assuming that we are, which will be interesting when we are not, supported.
Yeah.
What do you want to
I
add?
was just gonna say, and you can tell that because we need support from the general fund, these are already underfunded, and I think a lot of
Yes.
that is because of our size. Because it still takes a certain amount of people to produce these things, but we get a lot less money because of our population,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, and we have already, you saw that reduction from 2024 to 2025 in our budget is Kelsey, before I even got here, took a good look at our staffing and found like we could be more efficient. We don't need 3 healthcare providers, 3 nurses to do the job that now essentially one person is doing. So we have already looked at how we can be more efficient and streamlined, okay? So impact of federal funding cut. Most of the salary for a communicable disease epidemiology nurse, that is statutorily required, comes from federal funding. A large part of the salary for our clinical programs coordinator, medical assistant who does our immunizations, blood lead testing, and our family planning services and outreach is funded through that. Myself and Kelsey, our salaries are partially funded through federal grants, which impacts all aspects of public health, from Kelsey's work with EPR and harm reduction, my work with the community health assessment, how we manage and oversee all of public health. And then another example is this contractor that I just hired to help assist us with this community health assessment. That's a PPG federal grant. So this is a small look at what federal funding would impact if we were to lose it. Another big thing, vaccines for children, VFC, you'll hear us talk about this a lot, and I wanted to give you a little background about this program so you can understand how it came to be, why it's important, and how it is potentially at risk right now. So in 1989 to 1991, you guys might remember there's a measles epidemic in the US that resulted in tens of thousands of cases of measles and hundreds of deaths. When this epidemic was investigated, the CDC found that more than half of the children who had measles had not been vaccinated against measles, even though many of them had seen a healthcare provider. Cost of vaccine was found to be the primary reason for children going unvaccinated, even in families with regular healthcare. In response to this measles epidemic, Congress passed the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act in 1993, which created the Vaccine for Children program, and that became operational in 1994. This program is an entitlement program, a right granted by law for eligible children ages 18 and younger. The program was an unprecedented approach to improving vaccine availability nationwide by providing vaccines at no cost to VFC program eligible children through VFC program enrolled public and private healthcare providers. How it's funded. The Office of Management and Budget approves funding from the VFC program and then allocates the funds through the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services to CDC. After receiving these funds, CDC buys the vaccines at a discount and then distributes them to the VFC program providers at the direction of the awardees. The legislation for the VFC program provides general guidance for VFC program policy development, including eligibility, provider recruitment, and considerations for negotiating contracts with manufacturers. So essentially, we decide what we need for our community. We go in, we buy all of these vaccines, we get them delivered to our health or public health. We don't pay for them out of our pocket. These are funded, and then therefore we can provide these vaccines to kids who don't have health insurance, who are underinsured, and make sure that they can get them. And all they have to do is come up and say, I don't have health insurance, and they qualify to get whatever vaccine that they want or need. The goal of the VFC program is to ensure that a VFC program eligible child does not contract a vaccine preventable disease because of their parent or guardian's inability to pay for the vaccine. As a primary driver of health equity in public health, the VFC program supports improved immunization coverage levels among eligible children by automatically covering vaccines recommended by the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices and approved by the CDC, which includes all vaccines for children ages 18 and younger. It provides vaccines that protects against 19 different diseases, prevents 472 million illnesses and 29.8 million hospitalizations. And you might also hear us talk about 317, which is essentially like VFC, but for adults 19 and up. So these are adults who are uninsured or underinsured who still want access to these important vaccines. Without this program, this is what it could look like. So last year in 2024, again, with staff turnover and a new person in this position who was just getting their feet under them, we still administered 756 vaccines, 359 were VFC, and I think so it's not quite half of these were free ones, and I think part of that is only skewed because of COVID. We also order a lot of private COVID vaccines, so people can come get that. But we give, as far as non-COVID, I think we give almost more VFC and 317 vaccines at our facility. Here's an out-of-pocket cost for his vaccine, and these I pulled from our VFC orders, even though we don't pay for them. So this is actually slightly less than it would cost for us to pay for these if they were private. Mm-hmm. And we don't just order one, mind you, right? So say one MMRV, so that's measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella, is $165. We order those 10 at a time frequently. So this is thousands of dollars in vaccines that we get through the VFC program to immunize our community. So RSV, we've heard a lot about RSV. That's a really large concern in this community at high elevation with babies. One vaccine out of pocket is about $200. We can't just, be buying some of these vaccines for people who don't have health insurance if we don't receive some of this funding, it'd be really hard. So without VFC, we're gonna see an increase in preventable disease outbreaks and potential pandemic without a communicable disease specialist to help investigate control, right? Remember how I told you we have that statutorily required nurse who is federally funded? So we're seeing this double whammy of potentially what will happen to our vaccines, and then when we have an increase in preventable mortality and morbidity in our community from these diseases, who's gonna help figure that out? Is it gonna be, me, meeting with Dr. Lisa, trying to figure out how many kids have contracted measles or how many people have tuberculosis, and then what are we gonna do? So the huge fear here, right, is seeing, these are preventable diseases. And with the VFC program potentially, I don't know what's gonna happen with the funding, I don't know what's gonna happen with the recommendations around vaccines as far as not only like seasonal but school required. And I mean, we're not that far removed. My grandma had polio. I remember her like limp from having polio. That was my we've come so far in helping to prevent these diseases and have a really nice quality of life because of it. And there's a world where we might move backwards. And in a small town like Leadville, what are we gonna do with someone or lots of people if we have another pandemic? Even when the pandemic was happening and people are getting sick with COVID, we don't have enough hospital beds for tons of people who are sick. You're trying to send them to Denver. Denver gets full. Like, we've already lived through this, and it's terrifying to see what could happen. But so thinking about, obviously the first thing we think about is if we're gonna see federal funding cuts, how do we decrease our costs? And this is like what we've already decreased our budget from last year to this. And that's with an increase in cost of staff salaries. So we've decreased our total budget while giving all of our staff an increase for their cost of living and merit, because again, a lot of our staff, they don't do one job, they do multiple jobs. We all do multiple jobs, and they have done a great job. So we've increased our overall budget decreased our overall budget while still increasing staff salaries. We did have a PRN, so not even part-time, but a nurse who would come in occasionally when we needed her or on Fridays, because we didn't have a staff person on Fridays. She had to leave due to some family stuff. We budgeted $8,000 for her. We're not gonna rehire for that position. Our current person who's there Monday through Thursday is gonna try to come in at least one Friday a month to offer services on Friday. So there, we've saved $8,000. And then thinking about additional ways to cut costs, it would require getting super creative. We currently have an MOU with LC-BAG where we're paying for their internet. That is because we shared that building with them and then I guess broke our lease to move where we did. So I don't know if there's an opportunity to revisit that MOU and the funding. I think it's pretty expensive internet.
It's like at least over $700 a month.
What?
And which is tough because LC-BAG, I don't know if you drive by, there's not often cars in the parking lot. I think there's a lot of remote work happening with LC-BAG right now. So it's a lot of money in internet that's not really being used.
Good catch.
Our rent is extremely expensive. So that's, something to be thinking about. And we're not promoting that we move because there's a lot of consequences every single time we move buildings, and we just moved to this building and have established like this is where public health is with DHS, with Summit Community Care Clinic, with all these. So that's not what I'm suggesting, but it's like, how do we rethink or find a different way around like all of this money we're spending on rent? And then I can't see my little notes, but other areas that we could potentially cut. So we have built into grants that have encouraged, like training for our staff, food for certain events, some retention things like bonuses and wellness. So there's ways we could cut that, but also like we have really struggled with staff retention at Lake County Public Health since Kelsey and I have been involved since 2021. It's almost been 100% turnover, and we're finally at a place where we're retaining staff. And I think part of it is like we're creating a really nice work environment, and that does, giving someone a little bonus, doing a wellness retreat for our staff, doing things like that that are not insanely costly, that creates a better work environment, we think is beneficial. So that's another area that I guess you could try to trim the fat, but I would hate to see a loss in staff and staff retention because that is super costly.
Turnover is expensive.
Turnover is so expensive, and we've had Ashley in her position for over a year, and we just did her eval and she's working really hard and doing a great job, but it's like some of these things, it's gonna take you years in this position to really become competent. And that's that's one level,
Yeah.
you know? So there's a lot of training that goes into all of the public health jobs, and yeah, staff retention is super expensive. So that, is there anything else you wanna add that I did not include? You covered it. Happy to, if you think of questions after the fact or wanna see this so that you have it in front of you, include it, but that's kind of where we are at.
Is it even possible to decrease the budget by 13% if we lose all of our federal funding?
Well, we already are, we've increased
Yeah.
8,000 for that. What was the PRN's nurse that was all coming out of, is that core?
Yeah, it's
Or-
coming out of immunization core.
Core, which
Yeah.
so we already have, there's 8,000.
There's 8, I know.
There's 8,000, and I mean, I think we decreased our budget while still being cautious. I imagine we kept a little wiggle room in our budget, and our goal is to not go over and maybe even come in under, right? But we would hate to budget less and go over, so I think there's a world where you'll see that we will spend 13% less.
Bags internet is costing $8,400 a year.
Yeah, and I wasn't around when that happened, I don't really know if there is a path forward with that.
I know
but-
Liz has the MOU and has read it in depth.
Yeah.
If there are questions.
With bag.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, Liz is working with Carly on ending that.
Oh, great.
I'm
There,
only
you did.
asking so that we understand what public health looks like
yes,
if 13% of the funding goes away.
Yeah.
Please tell us that story.
yeah.
I understand that Ashley, we wouldn't be able to pay for Ashley,
Well,
we
we,
wouldn't be able to pay for vaccines.
yeah, I mean, the vaccine, what my point is too is the vaccine program's at risk both from potential funding and policy, I'm
Right.
fearful of, so
Right.
I mean, that problem might just solve itself, but then we have a whole slew of other problems, right? And this our communicable disease nurse does a lot of research, and if we have someone in the community who think might have tuberculosis, which by the way is on the rise in many places.
Midwest, right?
And
Yeah.
we're often monitoring at least one individual with latent TB, so it is something that happens in this community very frequently, and we're often
And
involved.
they'd have to move to Mountain West where it's healing. Oh, wait.
Yeah, so, I know that I just threw a lot at you, feel free to think about it, and if we need to come back around to this.
I will need refreshers on lots of stuff. I'm a little bit fully absorbed.
What, is it been a big day? In a nutshell, public health is very important, and we're doing our best to provide to this community and not be frivolous at all with our
You
spending.
guys are doing a great job.
Well, and in
Thank
a
you.
nutshell, we can do what we can to advocate to our federal reps,
Yes,
senators and representatives
yes.
to make sure that they're doing everything they can to protect the funding,
and
right?
state.
That's also our half of it.
I think this year
And
we're
state.
seeing a 5% budget cut from the state,
Right.
but from what I've read about the state budget cuts, this is just going to continue year after year, so how do we let them know public health is important? And that's not something we should be cutting, I mean, public health is already underfunded,
Yeah.
right? And now we're cutting.
Well, and we just
Funds.
voted to dedicate $100 million to law enforcement on the last ballot,
Yes,
and we didn't have any
Yeah.
taxing
in place to support.
to support that,
Yeah.
so we're also,
There's
as a constituency, making some interesting tax decisions.
Yeah.
Well, there's no bathrooms in Taco Pass, are gonna pay for themselves.
Right.
They wanna,
$5 million bathrooms.
they wanna rebuild Eisenhower Tunnel so there's no more icicles.
Oh, good.
They said they're gonna stop doing that, did you hear that?
Oh, they got that,
Yeah,
what,
they
77
were
million
managed,
or
they
something?
were able to manage it from the outside.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Alright,
Alright,
Thank you, Julia.
thank you,
Thank
Julia.
you all.
Yeah, yes.
Alright, mine's not gonna be very exciting either.
Laura, that was,
That's okay.
that was very exciting.
Mine was exciting. It was. In a terrible.
I mean,
I would just say in a scary sort of way.
in a scary way. Yes. Okay. Are you managing?
No, it's.
Pulling
no,
things
you're
up.
there for
You
it.
are, you're in.
Okay.
where are the PowerPoints?
Going to
Oh,
Teams?
Teams.
probably need to get out of the one that was shared. If you go down to stop share,
share. I haven't
hit a
used,
button on the bottom, stop share,
yep, I haven't used,
there you go. And then go to your teams.
okay. I haven't used Zoom in a long time.
And while Laura's getting set up for this, for Julia and Kelsey's last presentation, and then what Laura's going to present, right? So just painting the picture for the board. So the state has $1 billion hole in their budget. One could argue that they didn't do any long-range planning for a whole host of new programs they started. One could argue they don't have enough revenue. One could argue they don't spend enough, but at the end of the day, they have $1 billion hole in their budget, which they will look at the funding that is passed along to the counties to reduce that. At the federal level, there's a strategic restructuring that the Republican Party has pushed for the past 2 decades. And it is outlined in Project 2025 exactly what they want to do and what they are starting to do. So when it comes to big entitlement programs like what Laura and her team manage for our community, there are drastic changes to the status quo of the way these programs have been run for the past 60 years.
Perfect. And you can close this. And then here you can push play. So thank you all for spending more time with me. I thought we would start with a beautiful picture. So pretty. Of our area, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty of it. Laura Cruz, Director of DHS, for those that are online. I'm gonna go through a little bit of a few things that we didn't get to talk about last session. So I wanted to talk a little bit about where our caseload stands. I mentioned the last session that we have over 1,400 families that are on Medicaid. We were able to drill that down to individuals, so close to 40% of our population here in Lake County is on Medicaid, which is really high. Which is very scary with what's going on. Last year, we had 175 child welfare hotline calls that came through. What that means is essentially a mandatory reporter or a family member or somebody in the community called our hotline, letting us know about potential abuse and neglect. We screened in. What that means is we actually took on 39 cases for child welfare. I'll give you a little heads up though. This month we have screened in, or as of January, we have screened in 7 cases, just in the month of January. It has been no bueno in our community right now. And right before this meeting, our deputy director said, we need to figure out something or all of child welfare will walk out. They are worn out and these are not easy cases that we're dealing with. So I am trying to figure out the balance for them. Right now, I wish I could step in more to help them, but there's only so much that I can do to support a team that is a niche team in terms of what they do. So that's an alarming thing. Just a reminder to this group, kind of a little bit what Julia was saying is child welfare is a statutorily required program for us. Mm-hmm. It's funded by a block grant though, a federal block grant, which as of 2 Mondays ago was on a freeze, potentially. And so that's one of our big concerns is typically when we go through these sessions with the federal legislature, usually the most vulnerable funding sources that are, I don't wanna say attacked, but, brought up as concerns, are block grants. So child welfare is a block grant.
So that's a concern of mine in particular is because we have these statutorily required programs that we implement, but funding is a question mark. So, and you'll figure out here in a little bit what percentage of our funding is federal funding, which is not 13%. So, yeah, fun.
Yeah.
Alright, wraparound, we talked about this before, 63 families, children, and adults were served through wraparound last year. This is our prevention program, so how we strive to keep people out of child welfare. We have 509 households currently on SNAP. That is a low number in my opinion. That's something that we're working on, trying to do more outreach, trying to get our timeliness down, trying to keep people on the program if they still need to be on the program. Different strategies. I mean, we started, thanks to, I think it was the previous BOCC that approved the IGA with Garfield, or was it you guys? Can't remember. Was it y'all?
No.
You're talking,
For the extra support
Yeah.
services and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I know we started it last year, I
That
can't
was the
remember, was it
previous one.
officially
Yeah.
the beginning of the year or not?
Yeah, so we have been behind on our timeliness from Medicaid perspective, which we have met our goals with Medicaid, we're up to date on Medicaid. But from a SNAP perspective, we're still way behind because of new case managers. So we have an IGA with Garfield County, their DHS department, to help us kind of close our backlog. So those numbers hopefully will reflect in a better direction. I will say this, we are already seeing families dropping off because of the fears of immigration.
you're saying that it would be better if our numbers were up, right? Like, we're not actually looking for people to be dropping off, we're looking to make sure that we're covering all the people who would qualify.
Correct.
And this is not.
Correct.
Yeah, so just wanna
Yeah.
be clear about.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, our goal is always to work ourselves out of a job,
Sure.
right? But the reality is we can't, with the realities of other people's lives, we can't work ourselves out of the job. So ultimately, we wanna make for sure that people have access to the benefits that they qualify for.
Right.
So, if we see, we have 2,800 people or 1,400 households that are on Medicaid, Medicaid has looser requirements from an income perspective than SNAP does. But that number's pretty low.
Yeah.
So we're working on strategies to address that issue. Except we're now running into these issues where people are not wanting to talk to us because of fears, so. And then we had 19 APS hotline calls. I see this ticking up in our future as we have more aging adults and
Yes.
adult protective services, sorry about that. And then we had 11 cases screened in. These are pretty difficult cases, and I think I mentioned before, we have around $30,000 a year for APS cases. So a lot of the extra stuff around APS falls to the county. Okay. Showed this to you guys, I fit it on a page, it was hard. But kind of the highlights here, I'll give you the percentages, you don't have to figure it out. So, and I did the math right before I got here. So we have 68% and some change that's federal funds. 2.6 million.
So like 2 million of that is federal funds.
No point.
No,
2.6.
2.6 million.
The second column at the very bottom.
Oh, got it.
Is the federal.
Not 68% of 2.6.
68% of 3.8.
Yeah, okay.
That's what makes me
That's-
wanna,
That's the hit we're gonna
Yeah.
take if the Fed yanks the rug out from underneath us.
yes,
DHS won't exist.
But it's statutorily required.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I know.
It will be a husk of what it
No-
should be.
No roads will be paved.
It's true.
Go back to horse and buggy. Okay. Alright, and so a whopping 5.5% of our budget is state. Shows how much they love DHS. I'm sorry, I'm a little snarky about all this. I've been in way too many meetings lately.
Save space, babe.
And then our local funding is what our mill, that comes from our mills. So,
Alright.
yeah.
Can you just, and I know you have it later in the deck too, but just real quick, I don't know, pick 3 or 4, like county admin and child welfare in TANF and like the impact to DHS and like Lake County government as an organization, but then also the impact to our folks who are entitled to these benefits.
Yeah, I'm gonna touch on some of that here in a little bit. But essentially, you know, if you think about, say for instance, okay, one of the things that we'll talk about later in terms of conversations on the chopping block is our county administration dollars that we get from, it's federal dollars for the most part, that we get to support our operations of processing applications, eligibility, all that stuff. How the wheels turn when it comes to getting benefits. And so that budget, only what we get from here only covers around $221,000 of a $530,000 expense we have for that department. That is actually one of the most challenging departments for counties to fund, because obviously we don't get enough money to do what we're supposed to do. We are going to see a slight increase should things change at the state level in their allocations. But however, I was at a meeting yesterday with HICPUF. They are very much so directing us what to do with that additional money, which is not necessarily helping us with our bottom line of what the county is having to contribute. So, let's talk about Colorado Works. Colorado Works, we don't have a ton of caseload. That is essentially welfare. Like, that's, you know, the poorest of the poor in our community. But it's also a program that requires case management, which is different than like just benefits, distributing benefits. And so, those families oftentimes hit the same as child welfare. They end up in child welfare. They also hit CCAP. There's a lot of different programs that typically those families that are in Colorado Works program are hitting our different lines because of the assistance that they need. So that's a tough one because, like I mentioned, that's the poorest of the poor in our community that serves. APS, I keep bringing this up. I mean, that is like not a lot of money to help people. And that includes our staffing, right? At $36,000. And so we obviously have to supplement that budget pretty significantly. I mean, one assessment, which we're having to do with one of our adults that are in the program, one assessment is over $4,000. So that's assessing like their cognitive ability to take care of themselves. And then assessing it for guardianship.
And you have 11.
Yeah.
And so that already blows that budget by $8,000.
If we have to do that. We don't always have to
You
do
don't have to
those
do it
things.
annually.
No,
Okay.
no, and we don't have to do it with every case.
Nice.
We don't have to seek guardianship with every case. There may be, hey Kelly.
It's okay, keep
going. Okay. There's all kinds of different supports that go into child welfare and APS. It just depends on the situation that's going on. We may have to, assist in getting a individual into a long-term care facility, right? Because they can't take care of themselves anymore.
Yeah.
Things like that are actually teamwork between our eligibility team and APS team. All right, Kelly, go. Can you unmute? Oh, and Kelly's our finance manager, so I asked her to be on in case I needed assistance. Oh,
Use the thing to view, see what it says for the vision and stuff.
Oh.
We can't
We can't hear you, Kelly. Alright, if you wanna put it into the chat, we can look at it from that perspective. Alright.
Yeah, you can close that.
Okay, collaborative management, the 1451. This is actually state funding. It's a House bill that was passed several years ago. This funds one FTE. So this is case management, which is a really hard thing for us to fund. This is John with wraparound, right? If you wanna put a name to it. Our prevention type of programs with the state are the ones that they're talking more and more about finding relief for their problems.
Mm-hmm.
So luckily, this is not one that they have discussed in cutting, so. Alright, cool. Did that help hit on it, Tim? Do you want me to go further?
He's walking down. There he is.
Uh-oh.
He's not gonna hear you.
Okay.
Just keep going.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay. Okay, there we go. Here's our expenses. We talked about how the roll-ups just don't work for DHS, but here is the just overarching expenses that we have. The other is, a lot of that is pass-through. So actually our SNAP benefits that actually go to people, those hit our books and go out. So it's kind of a weird scenario. And that's a large number, we'll talk about that later. Here's some of our other funding sources that are not federal, except for Rural Collaborative. I'll touch on that in just a second. But we have Health Colorado, we have a small grant with them right now that's allowing us to do like home repairs and rental assistance. The Rural Collaborative is actual federal funds. Last year we received about 13,000 in reimbursements for Rural Collaborative. That's for unaccompanied youth. This is a program, I'll be honest, that I am thinking about putting a pause on because A, it's not a lot of money. B, I think we can absorb some of these activities in our other programs. And it's very administratively burdensome to do this program. And C, I have no idea where if those funds are going to actually be there when we do our first draw. This is tied to like DEI and things like that, and that's been one of the things that's been very, as I'm thinking about future, like here's something that I think that we can absorb within the rest of the wraparound services and child welfare.
Is it worth making that call before it happens?
Well, I'm meeting with them next week. So we've actually already signed the MOU with the previous BOCC. But I want to know what's going on in their world because we're not getting any communication. Yep. McKinney-Vento, this is a private foundation that essentially the school system applies for the funding and they reimburse us for part of Nancy's time that works with the school system and direct supports. And then we have a HICPUF vulnerable adult grant that we currently have until the end of June. This is helping us provide direct supports to vulnerable adults and case management beyond APS. Also, it is helping us get signed up to be a Medicaid provider so that we can start billing some of our activities that we do within wraparound through Medicaid, but as I mentioned before, all of these things are up in the air. Okay. 2025-2026 proposed funding reductions by the state. So a lot of this information here may not sound super scary, but I will say that this has been like a moving target more than anything, and this is the only real written guidance that we've gotten. So a lot has been going on through the JBC, a lot has been happening within the state. These were the proposed recommendations that actually the state, CDHS and HECPUF, provided to the JBC. So proposed 5% reduction in core funding. Core funding is prevention dollars that we utilize in child welfare. It also helps pay for some of our staff. CCAP funding. CCAP funding is childcare dollars. This is also a federal block grant. So one that may be touched. But we are not going to see a fund reduction in that program. We don't utilize our CCAP dollars fully for two reasons. A, we need to be doing more outreach, which is something that we're putting together strategies on. And B, we only have one childcare facility here, right? And these families that can benefit from childcare assistance, they are the poorest of the poor. So it's TANF, essentially TANF eligible families, okay? And then TANF reserves, you guys will hear more and more about this probably throughout the year. You may even have local nonprofits come to you and ask you about TANF reserves because we've distributed some of our TANF reserves to local nonprofits, even programs like GOAL to provide child programming, right? Or even expansion of facilities like Bright Start right now with our current TANF reserves. We're helping them expand a classroom so they can have more capacity to bring in more kids. So the challenge with TANF reserves is we're hearing that TANF reserves is going to not really exist moving forward. This is around, I think it's around 75 to 80K a year that we sort of have to play around with. These are typically funds that we do grant out to other agencies. However, they're going to use TANF reserve dollars to increase the amount of dollars that go to families that are TANF families. So like say for instance, I get $1,200 a month in TANF funding. Well they're gonna use reserves to bump that up, right?
Remind me what TANF is again?
Temporary assistance for needy families.
Okay.
So this is like welfare.
Yeah.
Poorest of the poor. This bucket essentially is going to be absorbed to help families more, but it means that we will not have that money to do special programming. It's a tit for tat, in my opinion. So, and then mitigation is a weird thing. So at the end of the year, we always overspend, right? And finally, we are budgeting for that expenditure as a department. But at the end of the year, the CDHS and HICPUF takes whatever money hasn't been spent by the counties, and then they mitigate those over expenditures. So they may some years we've gotten like $37,000, some years we've gotten $200,000 in mitigation. This is not going to be a norm moving forward. So mitigation, we will not see mitigation 2025-26. So that is why it's important and why I budgeted for us not to be mitigated.
So why is that not happening anymore?
Essentially, they're utilizing that money to cover their part of what they're going to have to cut. So it lessens the blow to programs.
Great.
Yep.
It's creative.
Great, but not great.
But not, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Potential federal policy changes and impacts. These are tough. So Medicaid has never had a work requirement tied to it. SNAP has had a work requirement tied to it since like the 80s. It went away during the recession, it went away during COVID, for a periodic amount of time. It was reintroduced, I believe in like 2016, 2017. But essentially, work requirements are typically tied to able-bodied adults without dependents. That we call them AVODs. And so anybody that that applies for SNAP funding that doesn't have dependents, I think up to age 64, I'll have to double check that, must work 20 hours a week in order to work, be a part of a workforce program, or volunteer 20 hours a week to maintain receiving their benefits. If they are out of work and cannot prove that they have worked, they can only receive benefits for 90 days. It's kind of a web, but yeah. So there is a lot of talk in Congress about instituting similar requirements for Medicaid. The second line, while I mentioned earlier, the state's talking about giving us more county administration funds. However, when we were on state calls last week, they said, well, while Medicaid direct support, which is like what's used for, prescriptions and doctor's appointments and that kind of thing, after the initial, like, we're shutting all grants down, they came back and said, no, we're not shutting Medicaid and SNAP down. The caveat behind it and the confusion behind it is the feds didn't clarify whether that freeze would not apply to our administrative funds. And so that's their fear, is that our administrative funds may not be there from the Fed perspective. So that's an additional $221,000 that we get in federal dollars to cover that team that does eligibility, which is a statutorily required department, to, essentially, we would have to absorb that in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Okay?
This isn't him.
Cuts to childcare assistance, mentioned that's a block grant. Deportations leading to unaccompanied youth. I have been doing simulations with CDHS on Fridays regarding this. What do we do if kids are left at school and they don't have a family plan in place? What is DHS's role and how do we respond? And so this is one of the things that, again, we're statutorily required. If we have an unaccompanied youth that doesn't have a family plan and there's not a kinship option, we have to pay for foster care. Expensive. Alright, we're already seeing this, immigration fears deterring families from applying for benefits. SNAP and Medicaid cuts. I just wanna give y'all a number here. So, not only is it a service to the people that need it, SNAP, in terms of providing food assistance to families that really need it, it's also a $900,000 revenue for our community. That's a big deal. So, when SNAP gets cut, it doesn't just hurt families, it also hurts businesses, is what I'm trying to communicate. Okay. And then we talked about block grants, and then Medicaid block grants. There's specific Medicaid programs that may, while Medicaid, the core Medicaid may be protected, things like expanded Medicaid, have also been in the conversations of being cut. Alright, I kind of broke this down, healthcare impact, we're gonna talk about food security impact, and then child welfare impacts of these things. So big number that was kind of scary to me is that our total Lake County expenditures for Medicaid last year were $9.7 million. Well, if Medicaid gets cut, how are we gonna make this work? Hospitals are not gonna be able to afford to serve clients. That's one of their biggest revenue generating sources. We have a hard enough time in rural communities keeping healthcare providers here. And if our 40% of the population that's generating revenue for them gets smaller, are they going to be able to sustain or want to be here? This is a problem. Again, we were talking about just from our perspective and our department's perspective, if Medicaid gets cut, we would need an additional $221,000 from the county to help us stay at our current staffing levels, which is already not meeting the need. And we're required to do it. Food security impacts. This is putting my old hat on from Food Bank World. So there is a high possibility that we will go back to pre-2021 disbursements of SNAP dollars to families. So when I worked at the food bank, we used to do a food stamp challenge with our board of directors. And essentially, it was figuring out how you could live off of $5 a day per person in your household. And so in 2021, there was an increase to that. It was a very minimal increase, in my opinion, to $6.20 a day. Well, we're talking about potentially going back to the $5 a day per person, which is going to be very challenging, as we all know that we walk away from the grocery store with 4 bags of groceries and it's $100.
Yeah.
$50 a bag nowadays. That's really-
50.
Yeah, grocery costs have increased by like 400%.
Yeah. So this is great idea. Alright, elimination of summer EBT. So if you guys don't know what summer EBT is, essentially, a few years ago, they passed a provision that would increase the allotment of families with children SNAP benefits in the summer, just because they're not getting meals at school. This is one of the things that's on the chopping block. The other thing that scares the out of me,
Jesus.
yeah, is the proposing alterations to the SNAP funding structure. SNAP has never been a program, or food stamps has never been a program that counties and states have had to pay any match on. So, alright, if you think about it, right? SNAP is a program that anybody that's eligible can have access to. So if we have to start paying part of that $900,000, which we know we don't have everybody enrolled, right now that should be. If we have to start paying part of that $900,000, then we are, looking at close to a $200,000 match that we would have to provide in order to keep those benefits at the level that they're supposed to be.
What they're currently at.
Yes,
Well, yeah, and that's such a deterrent then to.
sign people up.
To sign people. Oh my god.
Okay,
Okay, got it.
this is a huge thing on the agenda right now. So the thought process is states and local government should be paying their fair share for SNAP.
So just go right past the state level and get dumped right in the county's lap, you think?
Well, the state, I mean, that's, we have match requirements. We already have to pay to access our funding $241,000 a year in match requirements. So this would be in addition.
Well, the state's not gonna help right now, they're trying to take money away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Child welfare impacts. So what's interesting is that every Friday, I get to sit on a call at 7:30 in the morning and the state gets to tell me whether they were able to draw down funds that week or not. Access the funds through the system. So they are drawing down funds every day. Child welfare is one of their big concerns, cause it is a block grant. We receive $740K in child welfare dollars every year. That does traditionally cover our cost, even with staffing. But if we see that we have more unaccompanied youth, then that means we have to step up and figure out more foster care placements, which we are on the hook for that cost.
We don't even have them.
Yeah, and we do not have them. So this is something that cannot go away in our community. Like, if it hits the fan, this is what we have to do.
We will.
And, from the perspective, here's my solutions, which is not very great. There's gonna be a greater strain on nonprofits. When I was working for the food bank in 2016 to 2020, when we saw cuts to SNAP and we saw cuts to things like, Meals on Wheels programs and things like that, a lot of it fell on the local nonprofits and food banks to fill the gaps. Really, it is not a sustainable thing, and it's also not possible, right? So we're just going to have things that impact not only food security, but food security is so tied to health, and it's just a domino effect that we'll see should we have some of these things come to fruition. And then ultimately, we'll have to figure out staffing. I mean, our staff currently, we're not fully staffed. I am down 2 or 3 deputy directors. So I'm wearing a lot of hats. I can continue to wear a lot of hats. I am gonna be 40 next year, so it may be a little difficult. I'm getting older to wear that many hats.
Yeah, hold on to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I know you didn't used to do that.
I have to joke about something. Like, this is not fun.
That was funny.
Yeah,
Yes,
thanks. But yeah, I can wear a lot of hats, but I will say that so much of what we do is so specialized. Like, it takes our benefits case manager 6 months to get up to speed on all the regulations. And it's not all the regulations, cause they gave us 109 different operational memos last year. But yeah, it's all specialty types of jobs, and so it's one of those things that I can't step into a child welfare director's role. A, I don't have the degree for it, and B, you know, it's not my skill set, right?
That's not your job.
It's not my job. I can't be an eligibility technician because I can't be an eligibility technician and a director because of the separation of duties. It's this thing that I don't know what we'll do. But those are the two areas that we're statutorily required to take care of, we have to take care of, because ultimately they end up either with the sheriff's department, which I had to walk somebody over there yesterday that showed up at DHS, needing help. We're all dealing with all of this, in different ways, but yeah. So, and that is my lovely presentation.
Sunshine and rainbows.
You're doing awesome. Question.
Yeah.
When you said that your child welfare staff are like done, tell us, like, please be honest, tell us what's going on.
Yeah.
How can we support them in the short term, understanding that there's this huge systemic issue out of our control?
I have proposed, us needing an additional staff member. Because right now our director is having to, she has a full caseload, she has the biggest caseload.
Yeah.
You can't be a director and have a full caseload.
Yeah.
Like, and then also keep up with all the new stuff that is being thrown at us. Like, I have been shielding her from all of this, because if not, she's gonna break.
Yeah.
Right? And I need her to be focused on some of this though. I need that talent, mindset, understanding of the day-to-day to help make decisions as we navigate this, but I can't do that if my director has, 15 cases open, right? It's just not doable. So we really need an additional intake worker. We have one that's going through training right now, but if we start looking at the numbers and just the complexity of the cases that we're dealing with, cause these cases are not okay, we figured it out in a month, right? It's we've been to 8 court dates with this family, 5, family engagement meetings. We have to supervise their meetings, like say for instance, there's a mixed custody. We have to supervise those things. There's all these challenges, and the fact that I'm on the phone today with our deputy director, and she's like, I cannot find anywhere around here that will provide us the drug testing that we need. Now I'm working with St. Vincent, I have a meeting with them, but we've had issues with that in the past going that route. It's just these hurdles that we have in our community because we don't have the resources to really pull from, like not having foster care, having to be up at 1 o'clock in the morning calling foster care agencies for a 4-month-old, right? These are things that we don't have in our community. We have less resources. I can't just send somebody down the street for a drug test so that they can actually go see their child. We're having to figure this stuff out. It's annoying.
There's no inter-county partnerships that other communities do who are probably in the same boat that we are trying to figure out.
They're in the same boat. And the thing is a place like Summit, has more resources, but then we have to figure out transportation down there. So, which are things that are costly, but I need more staff to do that coordination. And I have the money for it, I'll say that.
And it's still gonna be 6 months before they can even help.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Do you have a support network of other directors?
Yes.
Who all brainstorm and
Yes. I met with them on Friday.
it's pretty much snafu. statewide.
Yeah, it's a mess because we're sorting through all the Fed stuff. We're sorting through all the state stuff. There's still, like, the state departments, like HICPUF and CDHS, they're all, you know, as Julia mentioned, business as usual. But we're dealing with all of these other pressures, right? So I have a management evaluation for HICPUF, which is an enema, I'll be honest. Coming up, and a management evaluation for SNAP because it's business as usual, even though we're dealing with all of this. So all the directors in the Northwest region, we're all like, we're dealing with it, it's real.
It's nauseating, I'm really overwhelmed for you. I'm overwhelmed for all of us, I wanna be clear, like I understand that you are the one who's at the front lines with your staff.
Yeah.
And it's all of our problem, but I'm overwhelmed for us.
What would be like a wish list of like the top 3 things we could lobby for at a state level that would be like real world changes that might, would they listen? Like, you know, in a perfect world, there could be like, you know, a couple levers pulled or just bump the needle a little bit in the direction of something that would help everyone who, you know, all the directors statewide, what
Yeah,
that would look like.
I will tell you a good start. Like, I feel like HICPUF and CDHS CDHS I think had 95 operational and informational memos last year. What those mean is some of them are just telling us something, other ones are telling us we have to do something, right? And look, Kristen and Kelly have been doing a deep dive into those memos to understand what are the things that these things are telling us more to do. I'll be honest, in my opinion, in looking at like CMS, which guides Medicaid, that's the federal side of Medicaid, their memos, there was like less than 50 last year, and they were all to do with hospitals. I'm like, the state is, they're micromanaging departments. Like, it's very frustrating that local control, if you're gonna ask us to manage these programs, then let us manage these programs, A, within our capacity, B, within what actually works in our community, and C, let us, let us work within our means. I mean, I guess that's A too, I mean, also, that's what's so frustrating.
I signed a letter last week specifically to CHS, is that what it's called?
CDHS
CDHS.
and HICPA.
Like going over all of these points too. It was drafted by, who actually drafted it, was it you?
It was me and Lauren.
You and Lauren. So Lauren wrote this all up, and we sent it off to Human Services, Colorado Human Services.
Would they have any more weight if all 3 of us were signing these things?
Well, I think that we can continue to, and especially through CCI and CCAT and
That's
like
wondering.
using those levers. This
Yeah.
was just like a letter
Yeah.
to the Colorado Department of Human Services. But like, we actually need to get our legislators to make some action too.
CCI is a good
Sounds-
place for this
Yeah.
conversation.
Sounds like, you know, they're trying to paint 64 unique counties in Colorado with the same brush, and they're like, everybody needs to do this, everybody needs to do that.
Yeah.
It's a case by case.
We're in HICPUF rulemaking, also Medicaid rulemaking, and she's been on all those cool calls too, that's why she's laughing, is they're wanting to dictate our business practices. So like, that's drilling down to how quickly we answer a phone call, kind of minutia. And it's ridiculous. It's like, and they're wanting us to have our staffing focus, like a customer relations person, somebody at a hospital helping out with Medicaid. And I'm just like, you just don't understand how this works. It's a bunch of people, in my opinion, it's a bunch of people at the state that have never worked in the county office, that are very creative individuals that like to write memos and tell us what to do.
Well, let me ask you this, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, on the phone, we're gonna still run it how you think it needs to be run, that's, what are the consequences?
They put a provision in that they can dock my salary.
Are you, has that happened? Has anyone ever had their salary docked for kind of going rogue a little bit?
There's 2 Northwest directors right now that have been given notice if they don't cure a certain situation in time that they will have their pay docked. And the BOCC is required to do it.
We're not allowed to make decisions in this meeting, but.
I already thought of a solution to that, like, well, you know, maybe, you know, someone would
Y'all can pay me
propose-
as a snowplower. That's what I'm trying to get
Yeah,
towards.
there's creative
Go,
minds in
Tim.
this room.
Hi,
Oh,
Tim.
Tim, fine.
Yeah.
Stop it.
Thank you. I just want to, as you discuss these important topics for the way that Colorado's government is set up, right? It is most certainly a local control issue, but also perhaps it is the time, you know, that the state is taking a harder look at itself in the mirror of how it is operated. Like Colorado, I think, is one of 17 states that is administered at the county level. So I mean, there are other models out there. Not saying anyone's better than the others, but I do agree with Laura. The state does make a lot of decisions without county's input, or they take input from more sophisticated counties, right? Jeffco, Denver, Arapahoe, that have massive budgets, massive teams that can provide a quick response on this, where a lot of, you know, the rest of the rural and frontier counties in the states are trying to decipher what the very first memo they sent last year meant. So anyway, it is just, it is a very large conversation, and I don't think that is lost on the commissioners, and I know it's not lost on Laura, but just, you know, for you guys to think about it, of the positions you are in and you were elected to, and then how the state is treating us is an important way to view the issue.
Yeah, I mean, the state of Colorado has been out of compliance with SNAP and Medicaid from a federal perspective. And part of this pressure that we're getting is essentially them being out of compliance means the counties have been out of compliance. And so there's been a lot of instituting of rules that are actually federal rules, which we should have been communicated a long time ago with training and that kind of thing. I understand when I hear that kind of stuff going on in rulemaking, I understand what that means and actually value it because I come from that world. But the fact that a lot of this is occurring with, you know, turn of the switch, we're gonna fix this right now, with all these other things and going on, is very difficult. Tim mentions something that in terms of solutions, what without federal funds, some states DHS offices or DFACS offices, so Department of Family and Children Services, they are state ran. They have offices within counties, but they are state ran. Kind of like a Social Security Administration building. You know, Tennessee operates a similar way, as well as Georgia operates a similar way. Whereas it is just a extension of the state, and they have offices that essentially they coordinate with counties.
Is that like the DMV?
Yeah, like the big DMVs. So like like I come from Colorado Springs. They have the county ones, and then they have the actual like
State run.
yeah. So that is an option. And that's actually some of the things that county directors have been saying is, if y'all wanna tell us to the, tiny little, detail of how to run our operations, why don't you just take this back over? But I will tell you that states do not do these programs very well,
Imagine.
so. Okay, that's all I have. I can talk to you about that.
Well, thank you, Laura.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Lauren.
It's been
Sorry
hard
to-
work. Hang in there.
I did apply to be on CWAC. And what is the other one?
Is that like Sea Org?
WAC.
Like Sea Org?
CWAC and WAC. One is the Work Allocation Committee.
Colorado Works, which is TANF,
Works, thank you.
welfare.
And the other is Child Welfare.
Oh, good.
And they're like, statewide committees where different commissioners serve to make sure that funds are allocated across the state. And the large counties always get a seat at that table, but I'm trying to make sure that rural counties are also representatives, so that we can make sure that like what Laura's dealing with is part of the conversation if we're gonna remain local control. Even if we're not gonna remain local control, it should be clear that we all have different needs,
Yeah,
I feel like.
well, and one of the things that in those committees, they talk about the they're actually working through this right now, the formula, so the distribution formula for, child welfare dollars, all the federal funds, right? It comes to the state through a formula at the federal level, then it goes to the state, and then there's a formula that the state comes up with, then that's how we end up with the amount of money we get. One of the things that's been frustrating for counties like us, that I think we're the third smallest, right? Something like that, county
Land mass or population?
population.
I think we're right in the middle, population wise.
Okay, so being a small population, right? They're not taking into account, and a lot of times, our caseload. So like how many people would actually be eligible for these programs? They're just looking at it from a straight population perspective.
Yeah, our population percentage is 37%, whereas others might be like 15.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Even with a small population.
Yep. So that's some things that these committees actually have control over, that those formulas come out of WAC and CWAC.
So,
Yep. Alright,
Thank you so much.
party.
Alright, everyone's invited. Alright, is that it for the work session? Nothing else? Questions, comments? Alright, it is 3:47 PM, Tuesday, February 11th. We are going to conclude today's work session in Lake County Board of County Commissioners. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chair. Y'all are amazing. I just wanna say DHS and Public Health, I'm really just so grateful for what you all are doing, and I appreciate what you have to deal with, it's huge. And I think a lot of people who don't have to engage with this part of government have no idea what,
Nope.
I certainly didn't until I stepped into this role,
yeah,
yeah, even if you work in healthcare and are somewhat adjacent to this stuff, you don't really know.
Do I exit out of this?
yeah, click that. And then end meeting.